Hello everyone, a very good afternoon. I hope all of you have taken your lunch and are ready to go through today's live webinar, the ACCA enrichment session for paper Advanced Financial Management. If this is your first time joining the enrichment session, welcome on board. My name is Joanne, the Manager Learning Support for ACCA Malaysia. And together with me this afternoon, it's our ACCA expert tutor guru, Mr. Alan Lynch. All right, now, before I hand over to Alan, we are opening up for Q&A throughout the session. So if you have any questions for Alan, you can just pop them in the chat box at the bottom right-hand side of your screen below. Please select to send to everyone, and then Alan will address your questions whenever possible, all right? Now, let's not delay this session anymore because I'm sure Alan will have a lot to cover with you all today. So I will now pass the floor to Alan. Over to you, Alan. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. And good morning, everybody. And well, good afternoon for you, sorry. It's a very early morning for me, but it is a very mid-afternoon for you. So you're probably slightly more awake than me. So you can help me get through the next 4 hours. It'll be great. So I hope you're all doing well. And today is about AFM, but today is not about finding out all of the knowledge about AFM. It's not about revising everything in AFM. We are going to use a question and answer from the ACCA paper in March, June. We might do more than one. We'll see how time goes. But today is as much about your exam experience, your exam technique, your time management, and anybody who's ever done AFM exams before will know how important they are, or indeed any strategic professional or even applied skills. Your time management, your exam technique is really, really important. And you don't pass exams, no matter how much knowledge you have, you don't pass exams with poor exam technique and poor time management. So today is very much concentrating on that. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to share with you a short presentation. I'm going to take you through just some background to AFM and just some general advice. And then we are going to go through a question using the ACCA system that you will use on the day of your exam. And what I would hope is that you will practice, and I'll talk about that more in a few minutes, but I would hope that you would do some of the questions with me as we go through the presentation, or as we go through the questions a little bit later on. But let's do some background on AFM and make sure that you're aware of everything, that needs to be done, and is really, really an important part of AFM and important knowledge to be aware of. So let me start this slideshow. So what we're going to do today, we're going to review AFM as a subject. We're going to complete some of the March, June 2021 paper, certainly as much as we can do in the time, but please be aware you're better off doing a little bit less than doing it really well. So be careful about practicing too many questions when you're doing revision. You can practice 100 questions, but you can practice 100 questions poorly. But if you do 10 really good questions, you're definitely better off that way. And we're going to have a look at a few of the comments that the examiners would say of this paper. And the examining team are really worthwhile listening to, because in areas that they believe that students are struggling, they're going to retest those areas. So whether it be around exam technique or whether around it be the type of questions that have been asked in the past, the examining team, if there's constantly issues with certain areas, they will continue to retest them because they are the skills they expect you to have going forward. So I have some polls that I'd like you to interact with as I go through this presentation. So the first one is AFM is mainly a calculation-based exam. And so jump on there. I see you're already flying through that, which is great. And as to get whether you think that it's mainly a calculation-based exam, agree or disagree. I'm going to just Wow, you're so really interesting actually, because I'll just jump out of that now. And when we look at this poll results, 77% of you disagree. So 77% of you believe that AFM is not mainly a calculation-based exam. And that's a really good place to come from, because you are very much correct. It is not a calculation-based exam, and we will talk about that more in a few minutes. So AFM, it's not an easy exam. I think we all know that, but there's no easy or hard exams in ACCA. They're all pretty difficult in their own way. And I think you should, if you believe AFM is the hardest, or it's really tough, or they make it really difficult, it's no more or no less difficult than any other exam in ACCA. What I want to do is address the pass rate. So pass rate of 38% in September. It's been as high as 42, as low as 33% since June 2019. So I have a poll question, and then I'll tell you what I think of the pass rates. So let me just find this. So why is the AFM pass rate so low? Are the questions too hard? Is it time management, or is it something else? So just be curious about your thoughts why. While you're filling in that questionnaire, I'd like to talk to you about pass rates. And students can get very hung up on pass rates and say, oh, only 38% of people pass AFM. But if you take any exam, not all of the students are as prepared maybe as they would have been in the past, or maybe you are. So if a student has studied for a number of weeks of practice questions, has gone to sessions like we're at today, you're prepared. There are also a number of students who maybe don't prepare as well. There are some students who don't prepare at all and take a gamble on the day that they, from their own knowledge, they might be able to pass an exam. So really that 38% pass rate represents all of those students who have made an effort to pass the exam. So that pass rate, if you're making an effort to pass your exam, more students like you do pass than 38%, because there are different groups to take part in that exam. So pass rates can be very misleading. And I think if you're in the bracket where you're making an effort, you're attending sessions like today, you're working hard, you're understanding the content, you're practicing your questions, I think you have a much, much higher percentage of passing than that 38. I think out of this poll, and it might be a surprise to some of you, but not to a lot of you, time management comes out. So 3/4 of you think that time management is a big thing for AFM. And everybody agrees that time management is a big issue for AFM. But what still happens during the exam is that students are let time get away from them. And it's funny, when you know what the right or wrong thing is, yet you still make that mistake. And we all do that. And we all do that in a range of different areas. So today, I'm very much going to be concentrating on time management. And I hope if you take nothing else from today's session, that you take tools and tips all about time management today that will help you going forward for the rest of your study. And not just for AFM. If you have any other subjects remaining after this, the same will apply. So here's a look at what the examiners have said in the past. And they say something very similar in every single exam, and none of what they say is a surprise, to be quite honest. So AFM is a big ask, but not impossible. That's true. Lots of people pass the exam, and lots of people who make that effort do get the reward and do pass the exam. So the examiners have said at this stage, candidates are required to demonstrate their ability to read and quickly digest comprehensive and detailed questions, apply relevant knowledge and skills, exercise professional judgment expected of a senior financial advisor in recommending or making financial management decisions that are likely to affect the entire business organization. Now, there's a couple of parts of that, like every ACCA requirement in an exam. It might be a long question, but you pick out what the important parts are. So demonstrate their ability to read and quickly digest. So that's time management. Apply relevant knowledge and skills. Everything else you will do. If you can manage your time And if you understand the content in AFM and you learn to apply it, so once you're not building everything from memory, once you're not rewriting what you've learned, and you're actually applying it in a question. So if you can manage your time and apply your knowledge, and hopefully later on when we go through questions, I'll show you the difference between applying your knowledge and regurgitating your knowledge. But if you can apply your knowledge and manage your time, everything else will come from there. The exercising professional judgment, recommending decisions, all of that will fall out from that. That will just be a natural outcome from what you are already doing well. So again, time management and application of knowledge. They should be the two things running through your mind today and every day, up and including the day of your exam. And if you can keep those two things at the forefront of your mind, make them the most important thing you have to achieve in your exam. Every time you practice a question, it's the most important thing you have to achieve. Time management and applying your knowledge. Everything else will come from there. We don't want to make it any more complicated, because the more complicated things you remember, you need, and you make it, the more you have to remember to do, the more difficult it will get. So you are going to make AFM really, really simple going forward. Time management and application of knowledge. So on the time management theme, let me go back to that one. On the time management theme, I like polls, as you can tell. There's another poll, and this poll is saying, I practice questions within the time limit suggested for an exam. And the time limit suggested for your exam is 1.8 minutes, 8 marks per minute. So I can see coming through here, just over 2/3 of you, or around 2/3 of you, don't practice time limits. And that is, I'll be honest with you, and there's the results. There are 63-37. If you don't practice time management while practicing your questions, you will really struggle to pass AFM more than any other exam. Practicing the time works very well in every single ACCA exam. It will definitely give you more marks when it comes to exam day. I promise you. But you have to practice now. You're 3 weeks out. Well, 3 weeks and 4 or 5 days, really, isn't it a Friday? So you're 3 weeks and 4 or 5 days away from your exam. This is the time. There's no better time than delaying it. You have to put yourself under that exam time pressure now. And that by the time you get to the exam, you won't even notice. It'll just be what you do. It'll just be your natural reaction. Oh, I have 10 minutes to answer this part. When my 10 minutes are up, I move on. It's just what I do. Because what that enables you to do is make sure that you attempt every single part of your exam as best as you can. And if you can do that, you have a much better chance of passing your exam. And these are very simple. There is no complicated advice for AFM. It is actually this straightforward. So what are the common issues in AFM? What are the things that students fall down on? And this is according to the examining team for AFM. So first of all, financial management matters. A lot of the basic calculations that you would do in financial management are expanded upon in AFM. They don't start again. You don't learn from scratch again. There's a certain amount of knowledge that you're expected to have when you start to do AFM. So just be aware that your financial management course is important. Question 1 is often well attempted, but students struggle after that. And we've talked about in your polls, you've told me why you struggle after that. I can guarantee you question 1 is often well attempted because students spend more than 90 minutes attempting it. And then they run out of time and they run out of steam and they panic because they're running out of time, and all of that builds up and builds up and builds up. And you see the level of performance drops dramatically after question 1. So when question 1 is often well attempted, I think we'd all accept that question 1 is well attempted, but it is well attempted, not within the applicable time. More than one topic per subject area. So it's understanding a number of topics and how they interact with each other. And that's the difference between remembering knowledge and understanding knowledge. So there's no point in you remembering everything about AFM if you don't understand what they are. When the examining team combines a number of areas, like we'll look at today in our question 1, when they combine a number of areas, you get, if you don't understand them, you don't understand how they link together. And you have a real opportunity over the next 3 weeks. I'm not telling you to start going to study again. What I'm saying is that you use the questions and answer practice that you're doing to build up your content knowledge as well. Your discussion and evaluation must relate to the scenario. Don't be telling the examiner theoretical background. Don't be explaining the advantages and disadvantages of net present value or adjusted present value or whatever that might be. Don't tell them that. Tell them why it's important to the scenario. If you are not talking about the scenario, if you're not building up to an answer to help directly with the scenario, you shouldn't be writing it in. Professional marks aren't just for layout. And professional marks, being professional is really important, because remember, the examiner only knows you from your exam paper. That's all. They don't understand how much you've been working. They don't understand the stress you've been under. They don't know how many nights, late nights or early mornings you were studying. They don't know how many sessions like this that you've attended. All they know about you is what you write in your exam paper. So therefore, you have to make the best impression possible. So it must be your goal or aim to be as professional as possible throughout your whole exam. Because when an examiner opens up your exam paper and they see well laid out, good structure of answers, points are very clear, an examiner will go, oh, this student looks like they know what they're talking about. And automatically you are being looked at positively. If the examiner opens up your paper and they see all the words all together and just kind of jumbles apart, no paragraphs, no layout, long answers written in the Excel tool, all of those type of things, they will think to themselves, oh no, this is going to be an awkward paper to mark. And if it's an awkward paper to mark, it's an awkward paper to find marks to give you. Whereas if it's well laid out and professional throughout, the examiner will go, oh, there's a mark, there's 2 marks, there's 3 marks, and they will build up and they will build up. And the easier you make their life, the better chance you have of succeeding. Not answering the question asked. And again, that comes back to knowledge and application of knowledge. And you might be asked to directly talk about something, and we talk later on about different things, but you might be asked to talk about a specific topic in a question as it relates to the case, but you just might tell everything that you know about the theory. Or you might have done a question during practice that you've remembered and you just rewrite that answer. And I'm telling you now, it won't be the right thing. Not taking a balanced approach between numerical and discursive parts. It's pretty much a 50-50 exam. Pretty much you might get anywhere between kind of 45 to 55%, but on average, it's pretty much a 50-50 exam between numerical and discursive parts. So I'm really happy to see you all recognizing the fact that it's not just a numbers-based exam, because a lot of students who fail the exam concentrate on the numbers for far too long and miss all of those marks on the discussions. Not answering questions to match the marks available. I will show you some of that examples in a few minutes. But again, why write half a page for 2 marks, but you can't write 2 lines for 10 marks? So you really have to have an idea based on the amount of marks, how many points that you have to make. And a good rule would be for every 2 points, for every 2 marks, you make 1 point and you explain that point. So you make a point and you say why. The why is the most important. There's no point in saying, I think company Y should do to follow this. Why should they do this? So make a point and say why. So if you have a 10-mark question, I would expect that there's 5 points and 5 discussions around each of those points. But for 2 marks, you're only looking at writing 2 to 3 lines, or typing 2 to 3 lines of text. And again, knowledge, not memory. This exam is all about application. So another poll question. Let me just put it up here. So just out of curiosity, my next AFM exam is your first attempt, your second or third attempt, or your 4th attempt or more. Okay, so we're coming in around about 60% of you are attempting this exam for the first time. 1/3 of you is your second or third attempt, and then a number of you are doing it for the 4th time. Okay, so again, I think everybody all of you doing it the first time, the time management and the application is really important. And if you stick by that, you won't have to do it again. Any of those of you who are doing it for the 2nd time or more, again, hopefully some of the things I've said already are making sense. Hopefully you can think back to when you were in your last exam and think, was I good with time? Did I apply my knowledge? Where do I think I went wrong? Because the important thing about, if this is not your first time doing AFM, when you go and do it in December, the important thing is, if you do the same thing again in December, there's nothing to think that your results will be any different. So you have to do something very different to turn it into a pass in December. And hopefully that very different will be here today. So what to look out for when you're answering questions. So no marks for mentioning topics. Ensure that you understand them and apply them. You don't get marks for guessing. There was a time in ACCA, maybe, there was a time in all courses worldwide, whether it's university, colleges, or professional exams, that you would got that marks were available for maybe the amount of content. So effectively, if you keep on writing, you'll eventually get something right, or you nearly might get your marks for effort. And you don't get that anymore. Unless you answer the question clearly, you're not getting the marks in ACCA. Be aware of marking for volume and effort, and I talked about that as well. If it's 2 marks, don't write 15 lines, don't write 2 pages. Repeating the scenario, this happens a lot. Repeating the scenario or listing the content in the question does not get marks. So if you're trying to fool the examiner by rewriting the scenario to look like you've answered the question, they know that. They're not going to fall for that. You're just wasting your time. No mark should be awarded for regurgitating knowledge with no application. If you're just going to repeat a book or repeat something from the ACCA website and not explain why, not tie it into the scenario being provided, you will not get marks. You will receive marks for a good answer, but not answering the question asked needs to be avoided, even if it's a great answer. So sometimes you might have the best answer in the world for a question that's nearly similar to the one you've been asked in the exam. And you know it so well, and you're nearly so excited that you know this question so well. But if it's not answering the question asked, the examiner will read through and go, wow, that's a really good answer. But you get no marks because it's not the question we asked. So remember, your exam submission is all the examiner knows about you. So therefore you have to put your best foot forward all of the time. So what should you know before attempting the exam? Well, you should know the course. You should know that assumed knowledge from financial management is important. The exam is a 3-hour, 15-minute exam. And generally what I would think is you have 15 minutes for reading and planning, and then 3 hours for answering your paper, which gives you your 1.8 minutes per mark. Be professional throughout, and use the available learning resources up until including the exam. And that includes being able to practice on the test for each system on the ACCA website, like we're going to do today, or like I will do today. Know the AFM course. So some things that happens is company valuations when you're looking at mergers and acquisitions and capital structures. We're going to be looking at some of that pops up today. Investment project appraisal. risk management. Some of those topics come up today. And I think every AFM paper, I go through those two topics. The Know the AFM course on valuation, capital structure, they all come up in every exam. But the difficulty is how do they come up and the manner they come up with. So if you don't understand the topics, you won't be able to change your knowledge around a little bit to match the case study. So my final question, my final poll today is around mock exams. So I have taken or I plan to take a mock exam. Good to see. This makes me smile and makes me happy. So 87% of you have taken or plan to take a mock exam. Okay. So you don't have to tell me now, but it's one thing to say, if you've taken one, brilliant, great, really, really good. If you still plan to take one, make sure to do it. So you don't get any marks or you don't get any benefit for your exam for having an intention to do a mock exam. It's really important that you take a mock exam. But I think it's really positive. I think for the 18% of you who haven't taken one or don't plan to take a mock exam, I'll be honest with you, I think you're making a mistake. I think you're making the exam harder for yourself. I think you're increasing the chances of you not passing the exam. I know the mock exam is a little bit intimidating. And I know the fear is in the mock exam is, what if I fail? What if I fail a mock exam? So the marking or the mark that you get in a mock exam isn't important. What you want to find when you do a mock exam is you want to find somewhere that gives you feedback. So whether you get 80% in a mock exam or 20% in a mock exam, the mark isn't important. What you need to ensure when you do a mock exam is that you have feedback, that you have areas to work on and areas to improve. That's the main thing about a mock exam. Forget about the mark. Don't let the mark intimidate you. Don't let passing or failing intimidate you. It doesn't matter. Just the process of sitting down for 3 hours and 15 minutes in a continuous nature, trying to manage your time and answering an exam paper, even that in itself will be invaluable when it comes to the day of the exam. So for those 18%, I would urge you as much as possible to take a mock exam. What else should you know before attempting exam? Time management. So identify the verbs in the questions or in the requirements, read them carefully. Is it assess? Is it evaluate? Is it write a report like we'll see today? Read the question carefully and identify all requirements. And we'll be doing some of that today. Assign appropriate time to each requirement in line with the marks awarded. If it's 10 marks, it's 18 minutes, 1.8 minutes per mark. If in the case that you're answering a 10-mark question and your 18 minutes are coming to an end, you stop and you move on. Just stop, finish a sentence and move on. You will get the majority of the marks that you're going to get in any question, you're going to get in the first 50% of the time you spend on it. So think about anything that you do. You'll always put your best foot forward. In the first half of doing any answer, you'll always share all the knowledge. And for the second half, you're thinking, oh, there's 2 more things I can remember. I can kind of remember, so I'll write about them, but I can't remember them fully. And you spend a lot of time kind of dragging knowledges from different parts of your brain. Okay? But you've really got most of, you might get an extra, like after 50% of the time, you might end up with 5 out of 10. After 90% of the time, you might end up with 6 or 6.5 out of 10. But that 50%, if you waste any more time trying to get that 6.5 to 7, or even 7.5, you're eating into time with the next question where you could be missing out again on 5 or 6 marks. So it doesn't work out. No matter how much you feel you understand a solution, and no matter how much you understand the topic, it could be your most favorite topic in the whole exam, you're really, really not going to do much better than you've already done. You're certainly not going to do as well as you would do by starting a new question. So be very strict with yourself. And this is something I've done exams in the last couple of years, not in ACCA, but I'm very strict. You split it up by the amount of time that you have. You spend that time, no more, and you move on. If you've answered a question quicker than you expect later on in the paper and you have time, then you come back. But you answer it, you finish a sentence, and you move on. And that will ensure that you will attempt every single question. And that is what gives you the best chance of passing. Remember, you don't have to get every question right. You have to get 51% of the marks. So isn't it easier to get 51% out of 100, out of attempting 100% of the paper, than 51% because you've only attempted 80% of the paper? So 50 out of 80 is a lot harder to get than 50 out of 100. So if you think about it in that way, it just makes perfect sense. But you have to make that decision now. If you wait until the day of your exam to make that decision, it's too late. You're going to be second guessing yourself. This has to be a way. You have to train your brain in the same way as people train to do marathons and train to play sports and train to practice music. You don't sit in front of an audience of 1,000 people playing a musical instrument and never having practiced before. When you know how long it'll take, you've played every note hundreds of times, you're well prepared. You know when there's a break, you know when you might talk to the audience. I know today how today has gone. I didn't just write this 10 minutes beforehand, and I didn't sit and think about at 10 minutes before we start today, what will we talk about today? I've planned this, I've thought about it, I've thought about what the examiners have said, I've thought about what you needed. I have 4 hours today. I know when there's going to be a break. I know when everything's going to happen. I know when I need to speed up. I know when I need to slow down. And I know that how much I need to achieve today. And I know if I'm talking too long in a certain area, I will just stop and move on, because you're better off hearing about everything rather than hearing a lot about only a few of the topics. And that is no different in your exam. Remember, only answer what's asked on the paper. It's great that you have all this knowledge, but you're wasting your time sharing it. A professional approach, relevant and logical arguments will always attract marks, but you must also always use the information in the scenario. It always has to be based on the information you've provided in the scenario. Remember, there's no one correct answer. There's never one correct answer in an ACCA exam, especially when you're asked an opinion. Once you explain why. If you give it an opinion and explain why, the examiner doesn't have to agree with you. And even if it's not on any of the answer papers now, the examiner doesn't have to agree with you. But if you make a decision and you explain why, you will get marks. There are 4 professional marks in the exam. So how do you pick up professional marks in an exam like this? You're professional throughout. If you're trying to pinpoint where those professional marks are for, you're doing something wrong. So just be professional throughout. And so many students have asked me, oh, I won't think about professional marks. They're not important. It's only 4. Well, if you've ever got 47, 48, or 49% in an ACCA exam, you know how important 4 marks could be. So on the day of the exam, you are doing everything you can to get every mark you can. Every single mark is important. Every single one should be fought for. Every single one. So don't ever think, oh, I can leave that out, or that's not important, or it's only 5% of the paper. Believe me, if you've ever got 47, 48, or 49 in an ACCA exam, you'll know how important 1, 2, or 3 marks could be. So what's a professional approach? A good answer layout, organized and systematic approach, a good structure, neat and tidy, and really good time management. Probably the most important, is the most important, there's absolutely no doubt about it. And everything that we do when we're practicing questions in a while will be all covering these approaches. What you should know before attempting the exam: in the scenario, you calculate and analyze so here's a scenario. You calculate and analyze the operating profit margin ratio using data provided in a scenario over a 3-year period. 1 mark is available for the computation and 1 mark for the analysis. So how do you get 2 marks in a situation like this? So you show the workings. You say profit margin increased or decreased. Has it increased or decreased? This will not get you the marks because clearly you can see by your calculation whether it's increased or decreased. Computer rate of change over a 3-year period. Has it increased? Has it gone down? What's changed? What in the scenario provides an answer? So if you're looking at the operating profit margin, well, what in the scenario has the sales gone up or down, or have the costs gone up or down? So what in the numerator or the denominator has changed? So what analysis can you do based on the scenario? And just take that approach, do the calculation and provide an analysis, and you will get 2 marks each time. So does anybody have any questions so far? If you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. What has been put up in the chat have been 3 links to the questions, the answers, and the examiner's report for the most recent sitting that questions and solutions have been provided by ACCA. Okay, so I would recommend that the only thing you'll need today really is the questions, but absolutely take them all now. But what I'd like you to do is have the questions open. Okay. So those links have been put up for you on the chat, so you can access them there. Before we do some questions today, what I'd like to show you is the examiner report or the examiner comments on the questions, some of the questions that we're going to attempt today. And it's funny how you can look at these comments without, maybe you may never have seen these questions. And you should understand the feedback because it's very, very similar throughout. So, and I see you're answering questions, you're asking questions here, Jody. So I'm just going to go through these three slides. If anybody has any questions like Jody, put them in. And then after I finish these 3 slides, I will go through a number of questions before we start going through an actual question today. So here's what the examiner has said about the question 1, and we would hope to do all of question 1, this Chakula Co, which is the March-June 2021. We hope to get through all that today. Now, what did the examining team say? Time management is an issue. Expanding attempts beyond the time available. So spending 2 hours instead of 90 minutes. Working on the right effort for the mark on offer. Markers cannot give more marks than an offer, no matter how good the answer is. Use an answer plan to keep yourself on track. So you could take those 4 points and you could put them against any exam, any ACCA exam, any question in an ACCA exam, any question in an AFM exam. On question 2, it's similar to previous questions asked in this area. So this question has come up before, and every time they haven't really changed the type of question. Why haven't they changed? Why is it similar? Well, there are still basic calculation issues, and there's a misunderstanding of the techniques that were needed in this question. So they have kept asking a similar question until students learn the basic calculations. They haven't learned the basic calculations, and exam after exam, they're making the same problems, making the same mistakes. So therefore, the examining team are going to keep on examining it. You must give a recommendation whether you're asked or not. AFM is, as the examining team says, you're a senior financial analyst. You should always be giving your opinion. You should not wait to be asked to give your opinion. You should be really happy to give your opinion. And in question 3, too much time on numerical parts. A more balanced approach between calculations and narrative is required, and highlight the importance of question practice under time limits. So now you have feedback on the March-June paper that the examining team have released, all 3 questions, and none of their feedback, this is all of their feedback, none of their feedback, and there's a copy of the examiner's team report as well that you can go through. None of the feedback is necessarily talking about the content. It's not really talking about the techniques that much. It's talking about time management. It's talking about balancing your time between calculations and narrative. It's talking about answering the questions asked. They all talk about time management. So think about that. There's a very much like, look at what the examining team are asking you to do. They're not asking you to get everything correct. They're not asking you to be perfect, but they are asking you to do some very basic things. And the reason why they're talking about these very basic things is that they will tell you in the reports, and they will tell you when you meet them, if you ever met them in person, and I have, they tell you that if students just did these simple things, if they managed their time, if they were professional throughout, if they always made sure to give an opinion, they're the difference between passing this exam and not passing this exam. Okay, so we're finished with presentation for now. I am going to have a look at any questions that you might have, and then we're going to move on to some question practice. So Jody asked, are we allowed to write our answers in point form or complete, I presume that's or complete sentences. Never write your answers in point form in your ACCA exam, never. No matter what the exam, do not write in point form. You write in paragraph form, I'll show you some examples later, but you have a point and you have an explanation, that should be in a paragraph. You leave a gap, you write your next point, but you don't write in bullet point form. Never answer in bullet point form. If you want to annoy your examiner straight away, more than anything, you do not answer in point form. It's really important. Nabila, are there any specific topics being assigned for section A and B, i.e. section A focus on project investment appraisal or hedging only, or each section is a mix of all topics? So Nabila, there are some trends, I guess, but to be quite honest, anything can be asked in question 1. And like there are probably 4 or 5 main headings in AFM that can be asked, and they're in the presentation, and you will have a copy of the presentation to download. But realistically, one of the biggest mistakes, I guess, or time issues that you can create for yourself in study is try to figure out what the examiner is going to ask. You have to accept now in AFM that the examiner is going to ask a question that you've never seen before. Not necessarily a topic that you haven't seen before, but you will never be able to guess what 2 or 3 topics or techniques that the examiner is going to pick and add together and put to a case study and create a scenario around. You just won't be able to do it. You won't be able to narrow it down. And realistically, Nabila, it doesn't really matter whether they ask risk management in question 1 or question 3. It's still coming up in the paper. You don't get a choice not to do it. So trying to figure out where it comes in the paper, I think, is not really helping you at all. I think what you have to accept with AFM and all ACCA papers now is that the examining team are trying to cover as much of the syllabus as possible. So you might think, oh, this question always comes up or that topic always comes up. I've told you, like, if you look back at my presentation, all of those topics will come up. But will they come up together? Will they come up individually? That's the part that we don't know. So you have to have a working understanding of all of the major areas in AFM. You don't have to know them all perfectly, and you don't have to know everything from start to finish, because you can get into that danger of remembering. But between now and your exam, most of your learning should be done by practicing questions and really analyzing the answers and really understanding the answers. I think that's the key thing you can do. If you want to go back to books or videos or whoever you're studying, only go back if you're struggling with a topic, and that when you do a question and you read the answer afterwards, it's still not making sense, then you revise the topics. Does the major areas refer to areas of focus as per your slides? Yes. I would say they're the major areas of focus, but anything could come up in the exam. Okay. So now, we are going to do some questions. And what I would like you to do is, so there's a couple of things that we can do today. And there's a couple of things that you can achieve during this session. So you've just listened to me for just over half an hour. We've answered some questions. We've talked about the main areas of AFM. Now, what I'd like you to do today is to be as interactive as possible. That doesn't mean you have to talk or you have to write questions in the chat. So I'm going to go through at least one full question, one question today, and the solution. And that's the aim. And it's not about covering as many questions as possible today. It's covering all the techniques and showing you the right way to apply throughout your AFM exam. There are a couple of ways that you can interact with me today. You can sit there and just watch. That's fine. I'm not too sure you'll get the value out of just watching me. I think what the best way that you will benefit from today is doing the question along with me. So if you don't have access to the ACCA test read system, just open up Excel and Word or whatever it might be. It doesn't really matter for today about what system you use. I would try and use Excel and Word on your computer, or a version of something like that, even on Google Docs, rather than pen and paper. But doing it on pen and paper is still better than nothing. But I would encourage you that you should do none of your study using pen and paper up to the exam. You should do everything using your PC. I think that's really important. But whatever way you interact today, I think it's really important that you do interact. And so what's going to happen is I'm going to do every question from scratch. But you don't want to be sitting there watching me do the question. So what you can do is, as I'm and I'm going to do it in small parts by small part. And as I do a small part, we're going to review the answer in detail. I'm going to explain to you why we had to do it that way, where the numbers came from, what kind of narrative we have to write. All of those things will come out today. That by the end of this, you will be able to go through, be really able to produce, or to know how to produce, a really high quality solution for an ACCA exam. And this is all about exam technique. This is all about your time management. This is all about being professional. All of those things are naturally covered in here. And applying your knowledge, most importantly. So what I would recommend is that you interact. So as I say, I'm doing this now, and it mightn't be necessarily in the same order that's on the exam paper. That is, I'm doing it on screen. You can follow what I'm doing on screen. Or maybe as I'm doing it for those couple of minutes, you can attempt that part of the question yourself. Then I will go through that solution in detail with you. So if you go through if you do your solution or your attempted solution, and as I'm going through mine, you kind of fix where you went wrong, and then we move on to the next part. But I think it's important that that you try and interact. I think it's important that you attempt these things today, even if they're content, even if it's things you're not familiar with, because today is a start. This is showing you how that you learn from practicing questions. So the danger is that students will practice questions that they're comfortable doing, and they won't practice a question because they don't really know the solution very well. And I think that's a danger today. So we are going to look at the March-June paper, and the links are being put in the chat, and we're going to look at question 1. I'm going to share my screen, and what I have done is and you could do the same thing if you have it done already. If not, you can, again, just use Excel and Word. Worst case, use a pen and paper. But again, do try and interact, and do try and get as much learning from this as you possibly can today. So as you can see, this is very similar to your exam experience and your exam day. And you will see that you have your AFM March-June 2021. The section of the exam contains one question. The question is worth 50 marks. The exam section is worth 50 marks in total. And you get some additional content on the day. So let's move on to your question. So this is what you see. And again, this is part of your exam technique. So before you even read the question, how is your screen going to look? How are you going to set yourself up? Because the worst thing that you can do is open up your spreadsheet, your word processor, and your requirements, and all your exhibits. And that would mean you'd have 8 windows open on your screen. And that can't be easily managed. That's not. So you need to have a process by which you attempt each exam. You need to have a logic. You need to have a way of kind of, okay, this is how I set up myself for questions. And again, this is what I mean by practicing that approach between now and your exam. This is not something you write down and you say, oh, on the day of my exam, I'm going to do it this way. This is something that you have to practice and practice and practice. And on the day of the exam, it becomes so second nature that you're doing it efficiently, that you're always making time up, and that it's not something you should think about, because it's not something you have time to think about on the day of your exam. That's what's important. You want to think about the answers to the questions that you're being asked. You don't want to be in a position where you're thinking about what to put, how to organize your question. So there's some very simple steps that I would do at the beginning of every question, whether it's question 1, 2, or 3, no matter what exam you're doing, there are very simple steps. The first thing that I would always do is open up the word processor and open up the spreadsheet. And when you open them up on screen, I just have them ready. This is how I have them. Now, some people will have the word processor on top and the spreadsheet down the bottom. You could have these reversed. But basically what you want is you want your spreadsheet and your word processor side by side. And if you go on to, I think, the ACCA YouTube channel, there is videos that I have done for ACCA that go through this in a little bit more detail. I think you'll find them. If you search my name, you'll find them pretty easily. But very basic. Now, what's important is that the buttons down the bottom here, the previous, navigator, next, are that you can access them. And as you can see here, you can still access the exhibits and the requirements and things like that down the left-hand side. Okay. Underneath here, like you have highlight and strike through and calculator and scratch pad. I tend not to use any of these. I would tend to use my own calculator, or most of the time I'm going to recommend that you use a spreadsheet. I would suggest you have a calculator to hand. If anything else, if you need help, by all means use the calculator. But to me, it's just one more window that you have to have open. So I tend to, and again, this is how I tend to do it. I'm not telling you to do it this way. I'm suggesting that you should find your way and stick to it. So, and this should take seconds. You should open up your question, open up your spreadsheet, open up your word processor, get them on the part of the screen that you're comfortable with and works for you. The next thing you do is you get to requirements. You highlight the requirements. You copy them in to your word processor. And you close that requirement. So again, what you're trying to do is maximize the space on your window. So maximizing the space on your screen. So now you have all of the requirements on. So effectively what you're going to be doing now is you're going to be writing all the solutions underneath each of the requirements in your word processor. Okay. So now that you don't have to have this window open and that window open. You have all of the requirements that you need. So what you need to be doing now is then, okay, under A, what do I need to write? Under B, what do I need to write? Under B1, what do I need to write? And you take it from there and you build it from there. But it means you're interacting with the requirements all of the time. So as you'll see in a minute when we go through them, you'll know exactly what you have to do. As you're typing in your answer, your requirements will always be looking at you. You'll always be understanding which one to do. Okay. So now we have our spreadsheet and we have our word processor. Now you have a choice to make. Let's go through the exhibits. So exhibit number 1 is an introduction. Chakula is a large listed company involved in 2 business sectors. Its main business is the production of food and drink for supermarkets and other large traders. It owns a chain of coffee shops nationwide. The board of directors think the company is undervalued and is of the opinion that it should focus on the rapid innovation taking place in the food and drink production sector. And you have all of this in the page I gave you today, so you should be following along with me. Chakula's board of directors have decided to unbundle the coffee shops business into a company called Kawa. Chakula will then either demerge Kawa through a spin-off or sell Kawa Kawa company. Now you're already seeing where the question is, okay, so they're going to unbundle. How do they unbundle it? How do you come up with a valuation? They're going to demerge it through a spin-off or sell it. Well, how much are they going to get if they sell it off? How much will they get if it's spun off or if they sell it? They will then turn its full focus to the remaining business. Initially, the shareholders will own Kawa on the basis of only one Kawa share for every Chakula share owned by them. So they already know it's a 1-for-1 share. Then Lala is a large unlisted company controlled by 20 shareholders who all have significant stake in the business. They own a number of hotels and they're looking to diversify into the coffee retail business. So here's who you're thinking of selling it to. Lala has approached about the possibility of purchasing Kawa. Lala will finance the purchase either through cash-only offer or share-for-share offer. So now you're going to be talking to the shareholders about, are they better off taking a cash offer or a share-for-share offer? And when you're reading this, all of these things, you should nearly be imagining what's going to come up in the question. If Kawa is demerged, it will be listed on the stock exchange as an independent company. Chakula is unsure whether or not to sell Kawa to Lala or to demerge it into an independent company. So that last sentence, you know, at some point, you're going to have to say whether they think it's better to sell it or demerge it into an independent company. So now let's go back to now you know, you've set the scene about where you're working. Now go back here to your requirements. Explain why a regulatory framework related to mergers and acquisitions is necessary to protect the interests of the shareholders and other stakeholders. Okay, a bit of theory there. B, discuss the two theoretical positions as raised by Lala's company's board of directors in relation to a company's capital structure. 6 marks. 2 theoretical propositions. We haven't come to them yet, but we know whatever we write, we'll get 3 marks each. Part C, prepare a report for the board of directors of Lala, which will, 1, estimate the value of each Kawa share if it's demerged and listed as an independent company. 2, estimate the additional equity value created when combining Lala company and Kawa, the percentage gain to each of Lala company and Kawa shareholder group under each payment method, and the impact on Lala's capital structure under each payment method. So very clear when you're doing your report, when you're doing your board report. What's the company, what's the value here? And then you have 3 areas you should be discussing. And then evaluate the financial and other factors. So that's financial factors and non-financial factors that both Lala company shareholders and Kawa company shareholders would consider prior to agreeing to the acquisition, and the impact on Lala's capital structure under each payment method. And then professional marks will be awarded in Part C for the format, structure, and presentation of the report. So everything except for, so 39 out of 50 marks are all done for Part C, including your professional marks. So that's where the marks are. That's where the effort has to be made. There's no doubt about that, okay? Now, again, you're still in the first minute or 2 of your exam. This all should be happening naturally. Okay, explain why a regulatory framework. So related to mergers and acquisitions, 5 marks, 8 minutes, 6 marks, 9 minutes. And then you split each of these. So 12 marks, 22 minutes, roughly. Again, you should know how long you're going to spend on these. And this includes the calculation part and it includes the written part. And that's where it's really important to balance any calculations that you have to do. They have to be done in the time period necessary. Okay. Now we move on and we have a look at the other exhibits that you have. So now you have an idea about the companies that you're dealing with after reading the introduction, and you now know what your requirements are. Now, the first time you do it like this, it might take a while. More practice. Again, it will become second nature. So the areas for further clarification. So further clarification has been sought by Lala Company's board of directors in the following 2 areas. Lala's chief executive officer has determined that a regulatory framework in the areas of mergers and acquisitions is designed to protect the interests of shareholders and other stakeholders. She wants to find out why there is a need for a regulatory framework. Well, we know that's related to, this part is related to A, So what I would do is I would go in here and I would copy that in, because you've been asked a question in A, and now you know the background to being asked. The acquisition of Kawa company will be a major investment for Lala, and its board of directors has concerns about how it will be financed. The board has heard that there are several theories explaining the capital structure of the company, including the following two propositions. Remember, in part B, the two theoretical propositions. A company should maximize its debt financing, and too much debt can be harmful to the company. So I would go in to my requirements and I would copy those in there. And I know I have to write 3 marks about company maximizing its debt financing, and I need to write 3 marks about how too much debt can be harmful. So I don't need that one anymore. I never need to open the introduction because you just have a flavor of the company and you've dealt with the whole of exhibit part 2. Now you have part A and part B, you have a structure. You know what you're being asked and why you're being asked it. In part B, you know what you're being asked, and now you know what the 2 propositions are. So now you know you have to write 3 marks of effort underneath this one and 3 marks of effort underneath this one. So if you get into the habit of doing this, it makes it so much easier, so much more straightforward. And again, this video is recorded, you have access to it, you can look at it and use it later on. So what do we have under here? We have information about the capital structure. So you have assets less current liabilities and financed by share capital reserves, and then you have some narrative. Shakula company shares are trading at $2.45 each and have an equity beta of 1.3. The part of the business that will become Kawa accounts for 24.5% of Shakula's total equity value. Shakula's loan notes A currently have a market value of 2.1 billion or 2,100 million. Loan notes B currently have a total market value of 400 million. The pre-tax cost of debt is 4.3% for A and 4.1% for B. And after the unbundling, loan notes B will be serviced by Kawa and loan notes A will stay with Shakula, but the pre-tax cost of debt for both will increase by 0.3% because obviously there are smaller companies instead of one larger company. It's expected that Kawa will maintain its capital structure after the unbundling. Lala's debt equity ratio is 40-60 and it has 1.2 million shares in issue. The coffee retail industry is dominated by Bunnyco, a large listed company which owns many coffee shops. The average asset beta for the industry is 1.15 because obviously Kawa won't have an asset beta. So you have to use an estimated one for the industry. All companies pay corporation tax at a rate of 20% per year, and the tax is payable in the same year as the profits it is based on. And the risk-free rate of return is estimated at 3%, and the market risk premium is 7.2%. Now, you have a choice here. You can copy all of this in and you can put it underneath the applicable one in your requirements, which is mostly going to be part 1 in this case. Or what you can do is you can keep it over here on your word processor. And you can keep the details underneath here, or you know to answer it, or open it when you need it. Because what's going to be important here is that you can copy all that in, or you can just use this as a reference when you're doing your calculations. So I'm going to do that for today. But again, you need to come up with your own way that you're comfortable with. So I now know if I stack them this way, I have my word processor and I can just open my capital structure anytime I need it. Number 4, I'm going to do it in a similar way. Because once you set them up to be a certain size at the beginning, every time you open them, they'll open in the exact same place. And that's really useful to have. So there you have the following estimated information will be applicable if it's demerged. Shakula's sales revenue of 4,500 million currently, which is 20% attributable to Kawa. Estimated after it's demerged, the annual sales revenue growth will be 6%, and profit margin before interest and tax will be 21% of sales revenue for the next 4 years. It can be assumed that the current tax depreciation will remain equivalent to the amount of investment needed. And Kawa will require an additional investment in assets of 25 cents for every $1 increase in sales revenue. After the initial 4 years, the annual growth rate of the company's free cash flows is expected to be 2.5% for the foreseeable future. Okay, now we can go back to the word processor and think all of this part in part 2 is really important for that. And then you have information on the acquisition in the final part 5. Now, I know this is a lot of reading, and I know this is a lot of information to take in, but that is what this exam is all about. And it does get easier the more you practice it. The following estimated information applies to the acquisition of Kawa-Co by Lala-Co. If Kawa-Co is acquired, the average PE ratio for the hotel industry is 15.61. Lala's PE ratio is estimated to be 10% lower than this. You have extracts from the profit and loss account of Lala and Kawa. After the acquisition, it's expected that the PE ratio of the combined company will be the midpoint between the two individual companies' PE ratios. The annual after-tax profits will increase by 62 million due to combining the two companies. Lala has proposed to pay for the acquiring Kawa either through a cash offer of 66 cents for Kawa share or 1 Lala share for every 3 Kawa shares. Lala will borrow the money needed to pay for the acquisition. So again, which one is better for the acquisition? Which one, the final one, which one is better? The impact on the capital structure, the gain to each of the shareholder groups, and the additional equity created. So that's exhibits number 4 and 5. Okay, so now you've been through all your exhibits. You are probably, after all of this, you're probably 7 to 8 minutes into your exam. And that's why practice is, obviously it's going to take me a little bit longer today to go through these points because it's as much teaching and showing examples today. It's not just putting my head down and doing it. But now you're about 7 to 8 minutes in the exam. You have your pages formatted like this. You have it set up. You have your word processor somewhere. You have your spreadsheet somewhere. Side by side is better because you will intermingle with two. You won't just use one on their own. You will need the two. And when you're writing a report later, you will see how you need to refer to the information in the spreadsheet. You don't want to be wasting time flicking between the two. You'll also make mistakes from remembering. But if they're side by side, you'll be able to write your report and you'll be able to take your calculations from the spreadsheet. But you'll see how you do that. So now you know that you have accounted for 2 of the exhibits. They're part of your word processor. As I said, you can put the other 3 exhibits in there. The reason why I tend not to in AFM is because there's numbers in each of those exhibits and they don't format very well when you copy them in. So you have to spend time kind of reformatting all of your numbers. So that's not always the easiest thing to do. But again, it's your preference. So you've reached minutes 7 to 8 and you are ready to go. So this is when you've used 7 to 8 minutes of your 15 minutes planning time. So remember, 3 hours and 15 minutes for your exam. So half of that first 15 minutes goes towards question 1. So this 7 to 8 minutes, you're ready to go. Now you have 90 minutes to do your exam or do your question 1 for your exam. If you go into question 1 thinking, I have 90 minutes to do this, it's going to go wrong. Because you don't have 90 minutes to do question 1, you have to break down the requirements into individual minutes. And that's what's really important. Okay. Now, so let's have a look at part A. Now, you also have a copy of the solutions for the ACCA, from the ACCA for these questions. Now, the ACCA solutions in some cases are worth more marks than an offer. So for example, if you look at the solution for ACCA for part A, and you look at the marking scheme further down that solutions page for part A, you will see that it's split into 3. And you will see that for talking about one point, you get 2 to 3 marks. For another, covering another area, you get 2 to 3 marks. And for covering another area, you get 1 to 2 marks. So that means if you gave the answer that's in the ACCA answer sheet, that's worth 8 marks. but the examiner can only give you a maximum of 5 marks. Look, they've told you this area is worth 5 marks. So you cannot get more than 5 marks in this exam. No matter how hard you tried, no matter how much you wrote, no matter how amazing your answer was, even if word for word you had that exact answer that they had in front of them, they can only give you a maximum of 5 marks. So it's important that you take that into account. So when you're looking at this question, you've been asked to explain why a regulatory framework is necessary to protect the interests of the shareholders and other stakeholders. So that's 2 questions: why it's necessary to protect the interests of shareholders and why it's necessary to protect other stakeholders. And what you should also be including is the reasons for a regulatory framework. Now, so the amount of information and the types of the type of answers that you have to give here does not have to be to the same extent as for the ACCA answer, because that's just you're just not going to be able to repeat that in the time that you have. It just won't be possible. Okay, so first of all, if you look, so for this one, I'd like you just to open up the ACCA solution. Okay, just open up the ACCA solution that you have in the links in the question. And when you open up that solution, just go to the first page on Chakula, because we're not going to spend time today me reading through or writing the text. I will for the report, but for these type of questions, I don't think it's needed. So if you just open up, because this will only take 1 minute, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this, because again, this isn't about teaching you the topics today. This is about getting you ready for your exam and your technique, because this question isn't going to come up again. There's no point in me telling you how to answer a question about a regulatory framework, because it's unlikely to come up in relation to this. So this isn't about teaching you about the regulatory framework. It's about teaching you how to answer an exam. So remember, 2 to 3 marks for talking about the reason why regulatory framework, 2 to 3 marks for respect to shareholders, 1 to 2 marks with respect to stakeholders. So if you did 2, 2, and 1, you'll get your 5 marks. So don't try and do 3, 3, and 2. Try and do 2, 2, and 1. What does 2, 2, and 1 get you? What does 2 mean? Well, I would say if you look at your solution that you have for part A, I would say that I would write that the regulatory framework ensures that the interests of stakeholders are protected, where natural market forces may not be sufficient on their own to ensure that this happens. That's it. You'll get 1.5, you might get 2 marks for that, you move on. Like 1.5 out of 2 is 75%. On average, you move on. Now, with respect to shareholders, the regulatory framework aims to establish that they're not negatively affected by ensuring that. And then you have, so somebody asked me earlier about, can you use bullet points? You can use bullet points within an answer like this. You can't answer in main bullet points. So you see, we split these 3 between sections. But when you're looking at this, you can say minority shareholders' rights are protected. The target company's management cannot block merger or acquisition where it makes commercial and economic sense, and sufficient time is made available for a proposal to be properly scrutinized. Now that 3rd point is really important. Sufficient time is made available for a proposal to be properly scrutinized. I would not write any more than that. You don't need the rest of that information. That is a perfect world ACCA answer. I would stop there, because you're looking for 5 marks, you're not looking for 8 marks. And then with respect to other stakeholders, it's to ensure that there is not a substantial lessening of competition after the merger and acquisition has taken place. All the rest of that. So I would say about 50% of the words that are written in that ACCA solution are required for you to do really well in this exam. You've got 4.5, maybe even 5 marks by writing 50% of the content. Worst case, you got 4 out of 5. You're on an 80% average. That 80% average is more than you need. So I would have thought if you're typing in your answer, you're probably looking for 8 to 10 lines of text. That's it. If you're still writing more than that, you are doing something wrong. You're spending too much time. You are not getting marks anymore. Like once you hit 4.5 marks, do you really want to waste 3 or 4 more minutes to get to 5? Does it really make a difference? Because if you're averaging 60, 70, 80% in every question, there's no point in turning a 4.5 into 5 when you can get 4 out of 5 on average right throughout the exam. So that's the way you have to be thinking. So again, look at that solution. Only about half of that word count is required for you to do really well and move on. You've got 8 minutes. That's it. 8 minutes is all you have, okay? That's really important to remember. 8 minutes. It's not a long time. So you don't overwrite, don't over-explain, make your point, provide some logic, and move on. Similarly with part B. So you've been asked to discuss 2 theoretical propositions. And you were told what the 2 theoretical propositions are. The first one is a company should maximize its debt financing. And then the second one is too much debt can be harmful to a company. And there needs to be a balance between debt and equity. Again, if you have a look at the ACCA solution, you probably, about 60% of that word count is probably required to get 6 out of 6. Your 2 theoretical positions have been split into 2. So that's 3 marks each. What do I need for 3 marks? I probably need 4 to 5 lines of text. I probably need to take a position and I need to explain why. So again, if you look at the ACCA answer, it says the 2 theoretical positions are based on the opinion that the company blah, blah, blah. Don't even go near that. Just go straight into your answer. So you have been given your 2 propositions. One is a company should maximize its debt financing. And the second one is too much debt can be harmful to the company. So go straight into there. And I would start off, well, the first proposition says that debt is cheaper than equity and there's a tax shield available. So it's better for a company to be financed by as much debt as possible. The M&M or Modigliani and Miller model have identified that. And since interest is paid before a company pays tax or corporation tax and dividends don't, the company actually has a tax shield. And the tax shield reduces the cost of capital. That's simple. 3 or 4 lines, getting to the point, explaining the proposition, explaining what they mean by that, and explaining if it's true. And then you go to the second proposition. It carries with it the advantage of a tax shield, but at high levels of gearing, it doesn't hold true. Financial risk increases the company's chances of financial distress, resulting in the cost of equity increasing. And then this overrides the benefit. So there is a trade-off between the benefits of the tax shield and the cost related to financial distress. Done. All of that, everything else you write over that is unnecessary words and unnecessary time. You have 6 marks, so you have 3 marks per answer. It means you have 4.5 to 5 minutes for getting through each of these 3 marks. Just get to the point and move on. So you're much better off getting 2.5 marks out of 3 for each point and doing it within the time than getting 3 out of 3, but taking twice as much time as available. Believe me, I promise you that. So make your point, explain why, move on. And that's all you needed to worry about in part A and B. But think about where you are right now. You've done your planning, you've read all your exhibits, you've got your page ready in the first 7 minutes. Okay? You have 11 of the 50 marks done. You have that done in around 20 minutes-ish, maybe a little bit more. And out of those 11 marks, you're probably looking at 9.5 marks out of 11, and you're bang on time. That is an amazing place to be. That's a great place to be already. You are effectively 20% past your ACCA exam. You've got 10 out of 50 marks. You're on time, you're on track, you're not overwriting, you're getting to the point. And in your head, you're thinking, wow, if this was a marathon, I'm 1/5 of the way through the marathon and I feel good. Everything's working out like it should. This has been my plan all along. This is how I've practiced. This is how I've developed my solutions. This is how I write. I've developed a writing style by practicing my questions. I don't overwrite. So you've not seen here, I haven't got into great detail about the regulatory framework. I haven't told the examiner what a merger or acquisition is. I would say that's probably the most that people went wrong in. They probably described what a merger and acquisition is. But you haven't been asked to explain what a merger and acquisition is. It's assumed in the question that everybody knows what you're talking about. So don't look to answer questions that aren't asked. Okay, so we're feeling good. We are, we're 11 marks into our questions. So we're about 27 minutes into the exam. So let's say we're a half an hour into our 3 hours and 15 minutes. We have 9.5, 10 marks in the bag. We're feeling good about ourselves. Okay. Now, this is most likely where, if question 1 is going to go off the rails, it's going to happen in this major part. And we all know that. Now, I would always use part A and if there's a B, but that initial theoretical part, because there'll always be initial theoretical part. It might be one part worth maybe 8 to 10 marks, or it might be 2 split up like we've done today. That's your settling. That's your easing into it. That's 4 or 5 marks here. We're able to split into 2 sets of 3 marks. We're able to answer it that way. Now I've eased into it now. I know what I'm doing now. I'm relaxed. I'm probably hopefully over the initial panic of the exam, and I'm much more relaxed than I was beforehand. Now here's where I can go wrong. So when you look at the rest of the exam, you get 12 marks for C1, you get 12 marks for C2, and you get 11 marks for C3. Let's ignore the 4 marks for professional marks. Let's just assume we're going to be very professional throughout, and we're going to get those 4 marks. So if you think about that, you're actually getting a little bit of time back. That's 7 minutes. So 4 marks are worth about 6 or 7 minutes. So if you're just going to be naturally professional, you kind of give yourself 7 minutes back for those marks. But if we have 11 and we have a 12 and we have a 12, we kind of say, okay, there are 3 parts for part C. They're split into 3. I've used about 20 minutes, so I have 1 hour and 10 minutes. So I have roughly 70 minutes. So let's say, what I would say in my head, I would say, give myself 15 to 20 minutes for each part, and then the rest of the time for writing the report. Because the writing of the report is included in these marks. You don't get extra marks for writing the report. They're giving you guidance in C part 1, 2, and 3 about the calculations you have to make. But then you also have to write the report. So I would say out of the 12 marks for part A, those 12 marks would be, you're looking at what, 20 minutes, let's say. Out of those 20 minutes, you probably want to spend 15 minutes doing the calculation and 5 minutes for the marks, or 5 minutes for the report, something like that. And then you also have that buffer where you have about 70 minutes left. So you've given yourself an hour to do part C, but you have that little buffer of time. And again, you should be pushing yourself, and this is what you should be practicing in your practice. You should have that stopwatch. You should have that clock ticking above your head. You should have the time on your PC, and you should be really strict with yourself. And let's say part 1, if you haven't done part 1 in the 15 minutes you've given yourself and you're not even close to finishing, you need to take out the solution. See where you went wrong. Did you write too much? Did you do the wrong calculations? Are you just not familiar enough with the calculations? So you need to figure that part out for yourself as well as you go. But we're going to do the calculations. So what we're going to do is we're going to do all of the calculations, and then we're going to write the report. Okay, that's generally how that I would do an exam like this. Certainly for part 1 of AFM, I would cover C part 1, part 2, and if in part 3, but there aren't in this case, but part 1 and part 2, I would cover everything that's needed in the calculations. I would be looking at giving myself 30 to 35 minutes. Again, they will take longer when we're doing this today, but I would be looking at giving myself 30 to 35 minutes of doing the calculations and saving some of the rest of the time for writing the report. In this case, all of part 3 will be given over to writing the report. So that gives you that little bit of extra time as well. Okay, so what we'll do first is we will do the calculations for C part 1. And then we will have a break. Then we will do the calculations for C part 2. And then we will go through writing the report. Okay. So I will show you the layout. I will show you the best way of making life easier as easy as possible for the examining team when they're looking at your solutions. It's really important that you mark your answers. Really, really important that you mark your answers. That's a very vital part of this. So the examiner, when you're doing calculations on your spreadsheet, the examiner can very clearly align them with the requirements. So if we're talking about C part 1, because remember, we'll be getting rid of these requirements at the end. We won't be leaving them in the question. You'll be only leaving the part you have written. So you want the examiner to see your calculations that relate to each part of the requirements, okay? So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at C. So generally I would just put it up in the top left-hand corner. C part 1, okay? Just so the examiner knows exactly what these calculations are related to. And again, you can do bold as a heading. You can call it Appendix 1, and we'll do the appendices as well. And it's useful for each separate calculation that you do, it's useful that you use the appendices numbers. So using Appendix 1, Appendix 2, and so on. Because when it comes to your report later on, you can say, oh, the cost of capital is 10%, see Appendix 1. And they go to Appendix 1, the examiner can see how you came up with the 10% and get you a lot more marks in that way. And again, it's a professional approach. It gets you those professional marks, and it gets you all of those marks that you need to pass your exam. So the first thing that we have to do, C part 1, is estimating the value of each COA share if it's demerged and listed as an independent company. Okay. Now, there's a couple of things we have to do before we get there. So the first thing we have to do, which is Appendix 1, is that we have to estimate the COA cost of capital. Okay, now, when you see what happens in Excel, and that's why you should never write any details on the spreadsheet. So when this happens, you widen it. Remember, you can't insert rows or delete rows in any of these questions in these spreadsheets. So you just have to work with them as they are. Okay, so that's why you would always write your detailed answers in your word processor. Your spreadsheet is just for calculation. If there is a one-line answer like a net present value, accept or not accept, that's fine, put it in your spreadsheet. But any detailed solutions that you have to include in your have to be in your word processor, because it's just much easier to follow. Whereas if I wrote lots of text along here, eventually if I did all of this, it would go off the screen, it would be difficult to follow. The examiner would not be able to find it, it would not make much sense, and it would look terrible on your solution. Okay. So we're looking at doing the COA cost of capital. So as I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quietly calculate the COA cost of capital. You can follow the screen along with me if you wish. I would suggest maybe just take your eyes off the screen for a few minutes while I'm quiet, which doesn't happen too often. While I'm quiet putting this calculation together, you can follow on screen if you wish, if you're really not sure how to do it. But even if you're not 100% sure, get your own spreadsheet, or pen and paper if you have to, but try and do it on a spreadsheet. And for the couple of minutes I spend doing this, you try it yourself. And then as I go through the solution, then you update your own spreadsheet. You kind of, oh, I did that wrong. Oh, I should have put that number there, whatever the corrections that might be. Because if you can do that, that's how you learn. You'll actually pick up a lot more knowledge by doing that as well. Okay. So I'm going to do just calculating the appendix part 1, just calculating the cost of capital. Don't worry about the value, the equity value at all right now, just the cost of capital. So have a look at that and see how you get on. Okay, there are a number of ways you can do this. You can change these into percentages. You can do whole numbers and just put percentages beside them. It's really up to you. There's no right or wrong answer as regards the examiner. Okay, so they will be happy either way. I would usually do a different way and use percentages, but I'm just doing it the best way for to show you today. But again, once you know exactly what you're talking about, that's all that matters. I would tend to put the formulas in to the sheet like that. The examiner will see the formulas. You do not have to write the formulas on the right-hand side again. The examiner will be able to see your answer and will be able to see the formulas and the logic that you put inside them. So you don't have to write any more than I've written here before. I don't know whether any of you got that right. So if you came up with a cost of capital around 11%, that's fine. This is a pretty basic part of any question to coming up with the cost of capital. So first of all, we look at the market value of the equity, and we're told from the question that they're going to have 24.5% control of the company. So again, remember this capital structure. So the extract from the company, and you're given all of the information from all of the information in this capital structure about the shareholding and about the cost of the debt, how the total market value of the debt will be 400 million, and so on. So you're told here that they will get 24.5% of the total equity value. We know that the shares are trading at 2.45, and there are 2 million shares. So share capital is worth 1 million, but the shares are 50 cents each. So they're going to have 0.245 or 24.5% multiplied by $2.45 a share, multiplied by 2 million shares, giving you a market value of equity of 1.2 billion. You're already told in the question that the market value of the debt is 400 million. The estimate of the equity beta is the 1.15 that you're using. And the 1.15 that you're using is the industry beta multiplied by the 1.2 million, which is the market value of the shares, which is up here, the 1201. The 1200 is used in the exam, but if you change that to 1, or what else you can do is you can just feed that number in like that. It won't change the calculation too much. Multiplied by 400 million, multiplied by 0.8, because the tax rate is 20%. So that's your tax shield. So it's 0.8 divided by your total equity. And again, you can just leave it as that, giving you an estimate equity beta of 1.46. Some of your answers will be different. So sometimes when they do them on the calculations like this, it's on a calculator basis and they're making assumptions. When you do the Excel format like this, you're going to get exact answers. So you might find in some of the questions, you're slightly different in the solutions than you are in the solutions ACCA. Don't worry about that too much. So you've estimated your equity beta. Your cost of equity then is your 3% plus the 7.2% that you have for the risk premium. And then that risk premium multiplied by the equity beta. So remember, this is the industry equity beta. So the risk premium is 7.2%, but because your equity beta is 1.46, it's 1.46 times the risk premium. So 3% is the risk-free rate, 7.2 is the risk premium, multiplied by your equity beta, gives you your cost of equity of 13.49%. Your cost of debt, which is the 4.4%, which is your cost of debt, multiplied by 0.8 because of your tax rate, which is 3.52. And then your overall cost of capital is your 13.49, which is B7, multiplied by your equity. Your cost of debt, which is 3.52, multiplied by your debt, divided by your total equity and total debt, giving you a total cost of capital of 11%. And in the exam, they just use a straightforward 11%. So if you get 11.013 or whatever, you can just say, if you wish, we're just going to keep it at 11%. But in this case, it does work out as exactly 11%. So again, if you have any questions, put that in, but then now you've calculated the cost of capital for CAWA, okay? And obviously that cost of capital is required because you need to calculate the cash flows, the free value or the free cash flows of the company in the next part. Okay, so what I'll do now is actually I'll give you a break now because the next part is probably one of the bigger parts, and it's good to have you nice and fresh for that part. Okay, so what we'll do is we will come back in 18 minutes. So I have to get this right. I think this is that would be 4:30 your time. So in a bit, take a break, go for a walk, maybe have some coffee or something, or whatever it is that you do for a break, and walk around the room. And if everybody then can come back at 4:30 your time, so just 17, 18 minutes time. Jody is asked why we didn't consider the 2.1 million loan value. Jody, that is because that was for the whole company, not for the part of the debt that CAWA will be taking when they demerge. Okay, so I'll see everybody back here in just over 15 minutes. Okay, everybody. Hopefully we all had a bit of a break and you got a bit of a chance to switch off for a few minutes. So welcome back. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue on doing this question for Lala and CAWA and the coffee company and things like that. So I think what's important to remember for question 1 is that it's, if you think about it like it's a waterfall, you are starting at the top step and you are just every drop down. So, or maybe a set of stairs is better. So your bottom step, your final answer is at the top of the steps, but you have a number of things you have to do to get there. And it's all about understanding when you're reading the question, what it is you need. And again, I mentioned earlier about the understanding of the calculations from financial management. A lot of this information is grounded in your financial management course as well. So just be a little bit aware of that's where that information is, okay? So the basic calculations are in financial management, then you're building on that in advanced financial management. I do appreciate that some of you may have got exemptions and you've never done the financial management exam. And maybe when you got exemptions, maybe for a college or university course, for example, you didn't go into that same detail. You do have to be careful and make sure that you do that catch up between now and then. Okay. So what we have done is the first part was a pretty straightforward one. We have done Appendix 1, which is calculating the cost of capital of CAWA. Now we're going to do Appendix 2. And again, I copy and paste an awful lot in these and change the name. And the heading just keeps the formatting. And what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the cost of equity of CAWA if the merger goes ahead. And again, the heading is as much for you as for the examiner. It's really important. And you can see that these headers don't work out very well. The layout of it's a little bit better in your exam than it is in the example that you can use on the ACCA website, but they're not always perfect. But rest assured that the examiner can see these headings, so don't worry about that at all. Okay, the most important part in using a spreadsheet is the calculations. So first of all, I am going to split Appendix 2 into 2 parts. And what I'm going to look at first of all is looking at the free cash flow rate. And then we're going to calculate. So we're going to just calculate. First of all, what I'd like you to do is calculate the free cash flow growth rate for the first 4 years. So that's what I'm going to do first, and I'll come back and I'll go through that. Again, even if you don't have a clue, even if you're very unsure, have a go at this and see where you end up. Okay, so we know all of these details. We know what the sales are. We know what the growth rate is. We know what the tax situation is, your profit before interest and tax, the additional investment, your cost of capital, which we calculate as 11%, and your free cash flow rate. So next, now you want to do the cash flows for years 1 to 4. Now remember, a lot of this information is in exhibit number 4. So that's where we got the sales of 4.5 million or 4.5 billion, 20% attributed to CAWA, your 6% rate, the 21%, the 25% increase, and the 2.5% free cash flow rate. So all that information was provided there. Okay, so let's get down as far as calculating the value. So we have all of this information up here. What are our sales? So we know our sales grow by 6% every year. You're told that in exhibit number 4. So again, our sales were 900 million. So it's 900 million multiplied by 1.06. So again, you can type in 900 multiplied by 1.06. I would recommend that you don't just do it on your calculator and type in the answer. I think it's good that the examiner sees some of your workings. Now, you can really use the spreadsheet to your advantage here, because you can see here now how it's in this formula, it's 954 or B22 multiplied by 1.06. And then by dragging that across, the spreadsheet will do the work for you. Your profit before interest and tax is the 954 multiplied by 0.21. Again, using the spreadsheet reference means you can just copy the formula across. Similar with the tax, because it's a 20% rate. Similar with the additional investment. It's this year minus last year's sales. So it's 954 minus 900 multiplied by the 0.25 that we've calculated. Again, it's the 1011 minus the 954 multiplied by 0.25. And again, you can take that across. Free cash flow is just the profit before interest and tax, which is 200 million for year 1, minus the tax of 40, minus the additional investment of 14. So it's just a 200 minus those two. And again, doing that, dragging that across, you don't need to be getting out your calculator and typing in, calculating column after column yourself. Let the spreadsheet do the work, and this will save you a huge amount of time in your exam. And then finally, the present value of the free cash flow. You will have the formula sheet. If you look down here on the left-hand side, you do get formula sheet with your exams. And in here, there should be the present value tables. When it loads, again, it's a bit slow from ACCA's website, but there you go. There's the annuity tables and there's the present value tables. So they are available to you. So again, it's the 147 in this case multiplied by the 11% discount rate according to your present value tables. But I just think it's much easier to do it using the Excel. So again, it's your 147 divided by 1.11. In this case, it's 156 divided by 1.11. That sign, which on my keyboard is shift and over the number 6, is square. So 1.11 squared, 1.11 cubed, and so on. 1.11 to the power of 4. So that's to the power of. So the power of 2, 3, and 4, giving you the present value. So your 4 years added together should be year 1, 2, 3, and 4. Again, let this spreadsheet do the work for you. It's really important that you do that. It just saves you an awful lot of time. Now you have to look at year 5 onwards. So you're making an estimate of the free cash flows for the remaining life of the company. So where do you start off? You first of all start off with your free cash flows from your latest year, so year 4. So that's 175 million. Again, multiplied by the growth rate, which is 2.5%. Again, we have that, you can see that just on the edge of the screen, it's free cash flow growth rate of 2.5%, divided by the cost of capital minus the growth rate, multiplied by 1.11, which is 1 plus the discount rate, to the power of minus 4, because you don't want to take in the whole life of the company. You want to remove the first 4 years because you've already accounted for the first 4 years in your cash flow above. And you should get 1389. I know in the solution they use decimal places. That's up to you. I just, in my report, I would just use whole numbers. It's okay to use 1 decimal place. I wouldn't bother using 2. I think it's a lot of effort. It's just more typing, more calculating. So I generally keep the whole numbers. I don't think there's any examiner who's going to take marks off you for that. That is just the ACCA layout. So now your total corporate value or total value of your company is 1.883 million. Okay, again, if you have any questions, shout. there is, and if these calculations aren't coming naturally to you, if you're not spotting this straight away, you really need to practice a lot of calculation questions over the next 3 weeks. These are the type of things at this stage, they should be somewhat, I wouldn't say straightforward, but you should have some idea how to do them, okay? And what I would recommend this question is, I was going to say later on today, but later on today for you is nighttime, I guess, but certainly tomorrow morning, I would take this question, like it's an exam, take question 1, blank screen, blank spreadsheet, and try and do the question as much as possible and compare it to the answer again. And that will really help your memory. Okay, so we know what our total corporate value is, and we'll just finish this part off together. So, and as you can see, even the terms I'm typing in on the left in column A here, I'm not writing in always those long-winded explanations that ACC have, those perfect explanations. You're just communicating with the examiner. They'll know exactly what you're trying to say. So years 1 to 4, years 5 onwards, for example, the examiner will know exactly what you're trying to say. So attributable to equity, so you're told that 25% will be attributable, or 75% will be attributable to equity. So you are taking the 1833 and multiplying that by 75%, which will give you 1412. Then you have a per share value. Remember, the company had 2 million shares. So you're taking the 1412 and divided by, so it was 1 million of equity, but there were 50-cent shares, so there are 2 million shares. And again, when you come up with whole numbers like that, you can go up here into your number and just change it. So it's 71 cents per share. Then you have the COA original value. And the COA original value was the 1.2 million equity, which we saw earlier when we were looking at the cost of capital, divided by the 2 million shares. Again, that will give you 60 cents per share. So then you have the gain if demerged. And again, the gain is simply the 71 minus the 60. So the gain is 11 cents, but as a percentage gain, the 71 minus the 60 cents divided by the 60 cents. So how much of a gain on the original value do you want? So it's 0.71 minus 0.6 divided by 0.6. And you can turn that into a percent and you get an 18%, or I think it's 18.3 or 2.2. But again, I'm happy, I think it's easier using whole numbers. It's neater and easier to follow when you're doing your calculations above. So now what we know is we know the answer. You were asked in C part 1, that was, so estimate, some of these came through because I was typing in Excel, don't worry about that. So estimate the value of each COA share if it is demerged and listed as an independent company. So the majority of your marks now happens if you go and have a look at the your marking scheme. And I think it's important to understand your marking scheme to get those 12 marks. You'll see that those 12 marks are added by points. So the value of the equity beta. So for identifying all of these numbers, the cost of debt, the cost of capital. So we did all of those in A part 1, in our appendix part 2, looking at the taxation, looking at the sales revenue. So for every line that you put in, there's a mark, there's a mark, there's a mark. Some have the corporate value, the 1883 has 2 marks. The value per share has 1 mark. The gain really, where the gain is important is it comes in useful for the report a little bit later. Okay, so it's not a case of getting everything right or wrong. It's just a case of picking up marks as you go. Now, one part I'd like to say, let's, for example, say that the cost of debt was wrong. Let's say you put 4.1 instead of 4.3, whatever it is, and you didn't add the extra 0.3%. So you put 4.1 instead of 4.4, and therefore you get a slightly different cost of debt, and therefore later on, or you get a slightly different cost of capital because of a slightly different cost of debt, and then later on you'll have a slightly different corporate value. Obviously, you will lose the mark on offer for your cost of capital, but you'll only lose the mark on offer because you got the cost of debt wrong. So ACCA used the own figure rule, or the one figure rule, but it's really own figure rule. And that means if you got the cost of debt calculation wrong here, but you applied it all right, you won't get the mark for that, but you'll get the mark for still doing your cash flow right, and you'll get the mark for doing all of this part right. Even if the numbers are slightly different, it was a calculation error. You don't get punished over and over again. So you could get the cost of debt wrong, which knocks out the cost of capital, for example, but you might still get 10 marks out of 12 if you did everything else right. So don't be trying to overanalyze every answer. The chances are you might get something wrong. But what the examiner can do, the examiner in theory could turn around and say, okay, well, if you put 4.1 in, they can go in and change to the 4.4 and see what the impact is. And if that's right, you'll still get the majority of the marks. So don't overly panic about something that happens in the exam. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to keep momentum. You need to have one shot at these calculations and you need to stick with it. Obviously, if something looks really, really weird, you need to go back and look at it. The other thing is examples like doing the cash flow. I can't highlight enough the benefits of using these calculations, the benefit of using the spreadsheet-based calculations, the copy and paste things over to do formulas rather than calculating each column individually. That will save you so much time. It's so much more professional, so much easier for the examiner to follow. And again, that's something, this is all exam technique. This is not really on being able to do cash flow calculation today. That's something you need to practice over the next 3 weeks. But this is all technique. And you can see it all looks nice. You have headings. It's very clear what your numbers mean. You have your original share value. You have just simple narrative on the left-hand side so the examiner can follow it. You have your appendices listed, Appendix 1, Appendix 2, and they will come in really useful now when you are doing your reporting in a little bit, okay? So all of this is really, really important. You don't have to be exactly like I am. Everybody will do it slightly different, okay? But that's C part 1 done. That's kind of 12 marks. So again, you should be thinking, okay, I've done my 15, 20 minutes. Even if this took you 20 minutes, you've got time later on to make up. So that took you 20 minutes to do that calculation. Let's say you didn't get it all right, but even you got 8 or 9 out of 12. So let's say you got 9 out of 12. You add that to your 9 marks earlier on. So out of the first, 25, 30 marks, you're already sitting on 20, 21 marks. You're nearly halfway to passing. You're bang on time. You're making good progress. You've got good momentum. And that's the key part about being organized. That's the key part of having a really good plan for your exam. This is really the difference between passing and failing. The knowledge really helps. Of course, it's important, but you can have all the knowledge in the world and still fail. And I know many people who've taken exams who would know more about this content than anybody I know. But when they went into the exam, they over-explained, they over-analyzed, they questioned why it was like this. They didn't answer what was asked. So I urge you to really concentrate on the technique we're using today. Really concentrate on your time management. Really concentrate on answering the question asked. Because if this was my exam, I'd be feeling pretty good about myself. I'm right on time. I'm looking at my clock thinking, I'm bang on time. I'm thinking in my head, I've got 75%, I'm 25, 30 marks into the exam, and I've got kind of 75%. I've pretty much banked 75% of those marks. It's a really nice place to be. You're getting really relaxed at this stage. You're getting really into the exam at this stage. You're getting really comfortable, and you're really making good progress. Okay, so the second C part 2 again, C part 2 has a lot of moving parts in it. And you really have to have a plan going into these sections. It can't be kind of as you go. You have to imagine what you're trying to see. And so go back to the requirements and what are we trying to achieve? So if you can imagine what your solution is going to look like, you have to have 3 headings in your solution. You're going to have the additional equity value created when combining Lala and Kawa. You're going to have the gain to each of Lala and Kawa's shareholder group under each payment method. And the payment methods were the cash offer and the share for share offer. So that's 3 headings you're going to have. The additional equity. You're going to have the percentage gain under cash offer and share for share offer for each of Lala and Kawa shareholders. And then the impact on Lala's capital structure under each payment method. Now, if you go to the marking scheme, and again, you're not going to be obviously seeing a marking scheme in your exam, but if you go to a marking scheme, you'll see how that's nicely split out over the 3 areas. So you're pretty much, when you see 3 areas like that and there's just 12 marks at the end, you can pretty much say, like one area might be 4, another one 3, or 4.5, 3.5. But you can pretty much say, okay, they're roughly 4 marks each. Roughly 4 marks each. I think the middle part might be 4, 5, and 3 is how they actually split it up. But roughly speaking, you're kind of, so you've got 20 minutes. You've kind of got 5 or 6 minutes per section. So, and that's the way you should be thinking. And again, it's not, you shouldn't be having this discussion with yourself on the day of the exam. This discussion should be well over. This should be again, this should be just like pressing a button. This should be your brain kicking into gear, like your operating system kicking up. You should be just starting doing it. You've been practicing like this for so long that this is how you should be thinking. Okay, so we're going to start off and we're going to call this Appendix 3. And this is the sale of Kawa. Okay, now, so again, we had those 3 sections that we were going to look at: the additional value, equity value created, the gain under each payment method. We'll do those separately, and the impact on the capital structure under each payment method. So the first one that I'm going to do, and I'd like you to make an attempt, and remember you're going to use the PE ratio and the equity values that we've already calculated, and you are going to try and calculate the additional equity value created when combining Lala and Kawa company. Again, I will do that on screen. You can follow me. I would suggest try and work on your own just for those few minutes it takes me, then come back and compare your answer as I go through it in detail. I really do think that you will learn more personally from that in that way. Okay. So you go ahead and I will just and again, a lot of the information that you're looking for in this one will be in exhibit number 5. So again, see the way I have it open here. You're not putting anything in your word processor now. So you have all the information in front of you. You're not flicking window to window. Okay, so now what we're looking at is the additional value created. Again, that was this was the first bullet point. Let's say worth 4 marks. So again, I didn't do this on purpose when I noticed it now. See the way I made that spelling mistake? Don't worry about that. That's just a typo. I'm gonna leave it there because it's not gonna lose your marks. The examiner is going to know I meant to write additional. You're not gonna be criticized for, you're not gonna lose marks. It is not a spelling exam. If I wrote out a word that didn't make any sense, that's when you have issues. But you don't have to go back and spell check everything. It's important what you write in your word processor is as well written as possible. But when you're writing these notes, don't get too worked up. It's the numbers that are important. So first of all is you have the LALA PE ratio, and you're told in the question that the LALA PE ratio, again, this part is all provided to you. The calculations are very, very basic. The LALA PE ratios, you're told, is 15.61 in the question. You're told that their estimate for the industry, you're told it's estimated to be 10% lower than this. So it's a 15.61 multiplied by 0.9. Your LALA equity value then is, again, I'm just using the formulas because if I got that calculation wrong and change it, everything else will update. So it's the 14 multiplied by the profit after tax of LALA, which is 171 million, again, provided to you in the exhibit. Similarly with CAWA, the equity value we know is 1.2 billion. We know from doing that earlier on. And we know that the estimated PE ratio is the 1.2 million divided by your profit after tax of 117.1. The profit after tax of the combined company is the 171 and the 117 provided in the exhibit. You're also told in the paragraph underneath the profit that the annual after-tax profits will increase by 62 million due to the two companies combining. So it'll be the profits there and also an additional 62 million added on top of that. You're told that the PE ratio is the midpoint of the two. So your two PE ratios are 14 for LALA and 10 for CAWA. So those two added together, divided by 2, giving you a PE ratio of 12. Your profit after tax of the combined company multiplied by your average PE ratio is 4.2 billion. The additional value created is the 4.2 billion minus the LALA equity value that you've calculated minus the 1.2 billion equity value that you've already calculated for CAWA. So the additional value created is 651 million. You don't do any discussion here. You don't put any narrative in here. You just don't say anything. You're just doing the calculation and you're moving on. All the narrative will come when you do your report. So again, that's 4 marks, 3 to 4 marks. Couple of minutes, knowing you're having a bit of knowledge, being able to apply the knowledge. A lot of the information, I think it's often underestimated that a lot of the information in an AFM exam is actually provided in the AFM exam. They're not asking you to create a lot from scratch. They're providing you a lot of information. What they want you to do is have the knowledge to be able to interpret it and use it. So we have done the first bullet point. That's 4 marks. You can see how these marks are nicely adding up if you just do it in a timely manner. Now we're going to look at the percentage gain to each of LALA companies and CAWA company shareholders group under each payment method. So we know that the payment methods were cash for cash or cash offer and share for share offer. So let's do the cash offer first. So what I'd like you to do again, as I go through this, you can follow on screen if you want, but it'd be much more beneficial to you if you had a go at calculating the benefit to the 2 sets of shareholders for the cash offer. Okay, so if the cash offer is received, Shakula will receive 66 cents per share, and you're told that in the appendix. So that will give you 2 million shares multiplied by 0.66, which is an offer of 1.3 billion. The Kawa original share value was 60 cents, and I just fed that in here. If you go, we've already calculated that, remember, up above. So then the gain is 66 cents minus 60 cents divided by 60 cents. So there's a 10% gain for the shareholders of Shakula. The Lala shareholder value is the 4.2 billion, which is the combined equity that we calculated in the last part, minus the value of the equity of Shakula, because it's coming out of the combined company. So one minus the other, giving you the 2.9 billion. Per share then, there was 1.2 million shares. So the 2.93 million divided by 1.2 million shares gives you 244 per share. And therefore the gain is 244 minus 2 divided by 2, because we know $2 was the original share value, which is the 2402 divided by 1.2 million shares, giving you a 22% gain. So again, there's another 3 marks in the bag, and we move on. So we've done the cash offer. Now we do the share for share offer. So now spend a couple of minutes while I put it on screen here. What is the share for share offer benefit to Shakula, and what's the benefit to Lala? Okay, so now the share for share offer. Again, a lot of the information you provide in the question. How many new shares do you have? Well, there's already 2 million shares in issue. You're told in the question that 1 Lala share for every 3 Kawa shares. So for every 3 Kawa shares, which is 2 million, therefore it's 667 Lala shares that have been issued. The value of the equity of the combined company, we calculated earlier, 4.2 billion. That means the per share value is the 4.2 billion divided by the 1.2 million shares already in issue, plus the new shares of 667 million, giving you a per share value of $2.28. The gain to Kawa shareholders is the 228 minus the 60 cents, which is the current calculated value. Again, remember we did that earlier, the original share value multiplied by 3 because you're trading in 3 shares for every 1 share. So it's 228 minus 180. So that 228 minus 180, or 48 over 180, gives you a 27% increase. So that's the gain to Kawa shareholders. The gain to Lala shareholders then is the 2.28 minus the 2 that we calculated in the cash offer divided by 2, giving you a 14% increase. So now when we go back to our requirements, the percentage gain to each of Lala and Kawa's shareholder group under each payment method, the gain for cash for Lala and Kawa, the share for share gain for Lala and Kawa. So now again, there's another 4 or 5 marks gained. If you do it just piece by piece, build up the marks, do it in the proper time. Now the last part. So the last part is the impact on the Lala capital structure. Okay, under each payment method. So remember, there's 2 payment methods. So under each payment method, you have to look at this way. So either through a cash offer or a share offer, and then there's obviously debt to be raised for the cash. So first of all, let's have a look at where we are with Lala before the acquisition. So I think I'll talk, this is the more meaty part. So this is the end part of it, and probably the more complex part of this question. As you might notice with AFM, it builds up, especially in the big part of question 1, it builds up the complexity and it gets harder and harder. Now, if you're struggling with this part, you can still include everything in your report that you've done so far. So don't give up just because you can't complete this part. I think the biggest problem that you might have is that when it gets to a stage where this part happens, that it can be very distracting as you try and figure it out and you're thinking, okay, remember, there's only 4 marks for this, maybe 5, 4 to 5 marks. You could spend 20 minutes on this and go nowhere. So you have to be very careful. And this is where you lose time in AFM. It's great for the calculation parts that go well and you know well. But if you're struggling with these parts, just leave it. Just complete the report. You're only going to lose a few more marks. But the amount of marks you'll lose throughout your whole paper by spending too much time. So if you can't sort this out in 4 to 5 minutes, move on. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the Lala company before acquisition. And remember, you're using all of the information that you've already calculated. It's just how you're putting it together. So the Lala company before acquisition, we calculated up here already. And this was the 2.4 billion equity value. So that's the market value of the equity. The market value of the debt. So the market value of the debt was taking the market value of the equity. Remember, you were told in the question that there is a debt to equity ratio of 40 to 60. So it's your 2402 multiplied by 40 over 60. So the market value of your debt is 1.6 billion. okay? It's 40% of your overall capital. So 40%, so those two added together are 4 billion. 40% of 4 billion is roughly 1.6 billion, and that's the market value of your debt, okay? So that's where you were before the acquisition. Now you're combining the company. So what happens when you combine the company? Well, first of all, it's cash by debt. So the first, you've been told already for the cash part, you have to put more debt onto the company, okay? So the market value of the equity. Now we have, as a company, we have calculated under the cash offer, remember, the market value of the equity is 2933, okay? Now that 2933, if you take the 2933 as a total of the debt of the company value that we calculated up above, no. So that amount becomes, so let me just look at this now. So that amount becomes so that amount becomes 46.9% of the equity, okay? Sorry, my formulas are all gone crazy. Or 47% of the equity. The market value of the debt is taking the 1.6 billion above plus the 1.3 billion, 20, plus the 400 million. Oh, sorry. You will get, these spreadsheets can become a little bit temperamental. And the thing about in an exam is just not to panic and just to stick with it, and it'll work, don't worry. So now this 2933 is 47% of the equity. And sorry, is 47%. So instead of, remember, this was a 60% equity and it was 40% debt. So now it's 47% equity and 53% debt. Okay, so that obviously changes a lot because you're borrowing. Remember, the reason for that is because you're borrowing the money in order to purchase the shares in the cash offer. So you already have equity, or you already have debt of 1.6 billion. You're borrowing 1.3 billion for the cash offer, and you already have the debt. You're already taking on the debt, the additional debt of 400 million. Okay, so your debt goes up to 3.3 billion. Your equity goes up as we've calculated above, which means you move from a capital structure where you have 60% equity and 40% debt to 47% equity and 53% debt. Okay, now just going to copy this down, and then we're going to change that to combined company. That's going to be share for share. Again, cash by debt, and now we look at the share for share. So on a share for share basis, the market value of the equity is our 4253 that we've used a few times right now. Okay. Our market value of our debt is just our 1602 plus our 400 million, because we are not taking on the extra debt of 1.3 billion in order to do the cash for cash. And sorry, in order to pay the share and bring in the debts to pay cash for the shares. So we have debt of just over 2 billion, and therefore our equity now turns from 68%. So before the acquisition, we had a debt equity ratio. So we had 6% equity. We've moved to 47% equity if we paid by cash, and we've moved to 68% if we paid by if we did a share for share exchange. Sorry, somebody raised their hand there. Can you put the question in the chat if that's all right? I'm not too sure whether your microphones are turned on. Yeah, Wani. I'm not too sure whether I can turn on your microphone or not. I don't think I can. So if you can put your question in the chat, and I'll answer it there, and we can try and have a conversation through that. But I don't think you can. But by all means, just put a question. Anytime anybody has a question, I am keeping an eye on the chat. So anytime anybody has a question, please put it in the chat and I'll answer it. So now what do we have? Think about your report. What do we have for your report? We now know that the sale of Kawa, what happens? We know the equity created. We know how the two companies will sit if it's a cash for cash offer or a cash offer, a share for share offer. And now we know the impact on Lala's capital structure. So go back to here. So there's your 12 marks. Okay. Now, none of this was really complicated. I know it might look difficult to some of you, but it was using numbers we already had. It's really just appreciating. So Felicia, can a spreadsheet, can you insert rows in a spreadsheet? No, unfortunately. So you cannot, unfortunately, they won't allow that. You cannot insert rows, you cannot delete rows, you cannot insert columns or delete columns. So unfortunately, there's no way of doing that, Felicia. So if you have if it came to a case that you had to create space. So let's say in this row here, you needed more space because you did this calculation wrong. The only thing you can do is you can highlight all of this, let's say, and then you can drag it down. And if you drag all that down, you'll keep all your calculations, but you'll create cells in there. So that's the best, really the best thing that you can do. The best thing you can do with that. But yeah, that's an ACCA thing that you can't insert anything like that. Okay, so we've done parts 1 and 2. Part 3 is a narrative theoretical answer that you're going to include as part of your report. So no more calculations are needed. Okay. So now what we're going to do is have a look at your report. Okay. Now you can open up the solutions that you have, and you'll see that report is written over about two pages of, or page and a half of ACCA writing. Now, if you go to the marking scheme, and again, this is just to build up a context of how much you need to put in. If you go to the marking scheme, so C part 1 and C part 2 were all for the calculations. So your report is C part 3. The maximum number of points you're going to get for that is 11. Now, if you see there, they have 7 to 8 and 3 to 4, which means there's 12 on offer. And then the professional marks. But again, if you do this professionally, you will pick up the professional marks. Assume you're going to get 2, 3, 4 of those very straightforwardly if you do a good report, okay? So now it's to answer the report. 7 to 8 of the marks are for part C, or C part 3, sorry, which is the financial and other factors. And then 3 to 4 marks only are in place for writing your response or writing a report regarding the numbers that you have calculated in your report, okay? So just keep that in mind, that you can really drag down writing out this report and writing in a lot of text when it's actually not necessary. So we're definitely going to write a much shorter report than what is in the ACCA paper, because you really only have 20 minutes to write a report, and that has to include the 7 to 8 marks that are on offer for answering the specific subject that's in part C, part 3. Okay. Oh, no problem, Wani, at all. But if anybody does have a question, just stick it into the chat. So I know we're not talking and we're not seeing each other, so I'm not seeing you guys whether you're following this okay, whether it's making sense or not. I do hope it is, but do give me feedback or do ask any questions if you have. So what I would suggest at this stage is that you have a look at the report. Okay. Now, the report is quite lengthy, and there is a lot of information in that report. And I'm going to go through the report with you now, and I'm going to suggest what I would put in the report in order for me to know I've come away with 9 or 10 marks out of 11. And again, I never go into any question, and you should never go into any question saying you can get 11 marks. But the problem with getting 11 marks is that it could take you more time than needed. I would much prefer to get 9 out of 11, to be within the amount of time that I have allotted myself for that question and move on. It's a much, much nicer place to be. Again, if you have a few minutes at the end of your exam, go back to your report and add in any additional things you want to add in. But just remember, adding too much into a report will affect your professional marks. So if you're adding lots of different information, if you're adding theoretical explanations of this and that and estimating debt and what the ratios mean and stuff like that, if you're adding all this, these book-based explanations, you will actually lose professional marks. So you're much better off stating a fact and making a comment about it. And realistically, if you're not talking about the calculations that you've done in your spreadsheet in some way, or you're not specifically addressing C part 3 about agreeing to about the financial and other factors, it should not be in the report. Okay, should definitely not be in the report. Okay, so we're going to just do this report. Now, simple thing about the report. Who is the report to? Report to the board of La company or co. Okay, so a heading. So the examiner knows this is your report. This is my report to the board of La company. Okay, now what am I going to do? What is this report actually going to do? You have been told what this report is going to do. It's going to evaluate the financial and other factors, and it's going to look at the calculations that you've already done. So this report will discuss the financial. I'm not worried about my spelling overly much. You can go back and look at that in a few minutes if you want. And non-financial, you don't lose points for spelling once it's still clear what you're trying to say. This report will, although some words will annoy me, this report will discuss the financial and non-financial factors that impact both La Co and Kawa's shareholders if the sale goes ahead. Yeah. It also evaluates the impact on the impact of the acquisition of Lala's capital structure. under the two payment options. That's all you need. That's your introduction. What is this report going to do? There's two things it's going to do. It's going to look at the financial and non-financial factors that impact Lala and Kawa shareholders if the sale goes ahead. And it'll evaluate the impact of the acquisition on Lala's capital structure under the two payment options. You've earned a mark or two for professional marks already. You're already picking up marks just by writing a 3 to 4 line intro. Any more than that, you're wasting your time. State what it's going to do what it does, and then make your conclusion. Okay, so the first thing is the factors to consider. And again, I'm just going to use the heading from ACCA, but you can use whatever heading you want. Okay, so this, first of all, we're going to look at what we've calculated already. So the first one we were asked to consider was the demerger. Now our demerger is in Appendix 2. Okay, so in Appendix 2, what are we going to say? So if we look at our Appendix 2, what was our conclusion of Appendix 2? That if they're demerged, that there is a gain of 18% to Kawa shareholders. Okay, that's all we're saying. We're not getting any more complicated than that. Then the next one was the acquisition. Using cash. Now we know what that was. So that was in our Appendix 3. And again, ACCA have a nice little table that they spend time formatting. Don't worry about the time formatting that. Additional value for Kawa shareholders was 10%. And then I would just, underneath here, keep it a little bit simple, relatively formatted and in line, additional value. Was 22%. And then finally, the acquisition share. I'll just cheat here a little bit. Share, which was also in Appendix 3. And we're going to say the same thing. So we're saying exactly what's here, except the number is different. So our additional value for Kawa shareholders was 27%. And again, you just copy this in and just change the number again. Don't copy out everything. Do as little manual work as possible. And then that was 27%, and the gain to Lala was 14%. Okay, so now we have given a summary of our answers, of our calculations. Let's create some space down there and get rid of all that. So now what we're going to do. So we are going to make our interpretation of our answers. So let's have a look at, and let's just discuss, I guess, one way, but again, if you have any questions, do ask. Let's just discuss the ACCA answers, because we're not going to type out all of this. So if we look under the factors to consider, we've given the summary of the output of the results. Now, the initial valuation would indicate that the demerger is the better option for Kawa shareholders. And why is that? Well, that the 18% for the demerger is higher than they would get for the cash or for the share-for-share option. Well, it's not higher than for the share-for-share option, but they do get, compared to the acquisition, if it's paid for by cash. However, the share-for-share exchange gives a higher return compared to the demerger, and therefore on financial grounds is the better option. So the demerger is better than cash, but share-for-share is better than them all. Although Lala company shareholders lose some additional value from the acquisition if the share for share option is chosen, so they only get a 14% increase instead of a 22% increase with cash, they will probably still favor the acquisition because the company's value will increase and so will the value of their shares. And we know that will happen. Now, there's also a benefit in the share for share increase that they don't take on all that additional debt. However, the following additional factors need to be considered. The estimates are based on predicted values, both for the demerger and for the acquisition. It is therefore likely that there will be changes, and it's recommended that Lala undertake a sensitivity analysis and assess the results. Kawa shareholders probably have three main areas they would consider. With respect to the acquisition with the share for share, they would become part of a larger company. They would be minority shareholders, and they mightn't have significant influence. So the Kawa shareholders may be of the opinion that the operating profit as a standalone company may give them a better opportunity for the strategy. But they may also decide that they would need to be part of a larger company. Also, the shareholders cannot be certain whether the additional value is realistic of 27%. And then Lala as an unlisted company, they might be concerned about how to exit the company. So if you're a shareholder of Kawa and it's unlisted, then how can you exit the company? Now, they have written a paragraph for each of them. I would suggest they are one-line points. Okay, so I would be writing down for Kawa shareholders, the share for share gives a better overall return. Okay. If the choice was being made purely on financial grounds. So for the first three long lines in ACCA, that's what I have written. For Lala shareholders, they would be in favor of the acquisition as it increases overall value of shares. Okay, so that's your conclusion based on the results. Again, just be aware of the amount of content that's in the ACCA answer versus the amount of content that you really need. However, the following need to be considered. Now, somebody asked me earlier about bullet points. I would not put bullet points in here. I would put these as paragraphs. So the following need to be considered, and go down and make another point. I wouldn't use bullet points. I wouldn't use that. You don't have to. I wouldn't use numbers. Just make it conversational based on paragraphs. So the valuations are based on predicted variables and a sensitivity analysis may provide more might provide a better way to interpret their results. Now, that doesn't look like anything ACCA said. I'm not going to rewrite what they said, but the message is exactly the same. Right? Our shareholders should consider some areas around the offer. Now, what are these? So again, part of a larger company and what that means. Now, that's me summarizing that. I would expect you to write a sentence about that, but not much more. So it just means that they'd have less influence. Again, it's only one sentence. So they're part of a larger company. They would own 36% of the capital. I'm not too concerned. I wouldn't be overly worried about repeating all the numbers. Part of a larger company, less influence. I think that's the point. They're minority shareholders. So they may have the opinion that a standalone works. I prefer to be. So I hope you're getting the point here about what we're trying to achieve. So it's not writing an essay, it's writing points. You've done all the calculations. You know what the results are here. You've given, so if this is the board of directors, you've given them the outcomes. Here's the likely outcomes. What do they need to be aware of? So you can go through that and you can identify other areas that would influence Lala. That's fine. You can do all of that now. And you can look at the rest of that answer and try and do this report in that vein. Try and do the report from the perspective of just make your point and move on. So I would say, again, you're looking at a third of the word count in your report on exam day than you would be looking in this report on ACCA, okay? And again, that'll get you 9 or 10 out of 12, but it'll get you done in the time, and I can't stress that enough. It will get you done in the time, and it will pass you the exam with much more than you need. So perfection takes time, and you don't have time. So stop stressing and worrying and pushing yourself to perfection. And what you need to do is concentrate on getting the main points across. And again, you're picking up your marks, okay? So I'm just going to talk you through the rest of the report, okay? I'm not going to do any more typing. So if we look at the rest of the report, we see the capital structure changes. And then again, we've calculated the capital structure changes already, and we talked about that. That's the last part that we looked at in Appendix 3. So this was the impact of debt and equity and how that changes. And then all you're really doing is talking about how the possible impact of financial distress in the future because of the high borrowing costs. You'd be worrying about that. The share for share increases the proportion of equity. If the share for share increases the proportion of equity, then you're not taking full advantage of a tax shield. And then, but Lala would likely find it difficult to get debt, so they could explore it further. You just have that tutorial note, you can ignore that whole section. And then the conclusion. Now, remember, let's go back and find this. Evaluate the financial and other factors that both Lala shareholders and Kawa shareholders would consider prior to agreeing the acquisition. Now, think about what you've done here in this report. You haven't said the financial factors to worry are. The non-financial factors for Lala shareholders are. You have built them into the report. That's the key part. There isn't a section saying the financial impacts are. And again, if you go down to the marking scheme, it tells you that for the 7 to 8 marks, the evaluation report could include, for example, financial returns from demerger and each form of consideration, exit strategy, concern about becoming minority shareholders, concerns for majority shareholders, assumptions made whether the share for share exchange is realistic. So they're not expecting you to write a whole section. They don't want the theoretical, oh, the financial factors to consider are, the non-financial factors to consider are. That's not how you do really well in this exam. And that's not how you do it fast either. That's not how you do it within the time. If you look at this report, they are sprinkled throughout the report as the issue comes up. So what they have done is they have split the report based on effectively your appendices in your calculations. So look what they've done. The factors to consider are all based on Appendix 1 and 2, really, and partly 3. And then your capital structure changes are all based on Part 3. But again, your factors are built into the conversation. As it becomes important in the report to note something, you have included it. Finally, the big part for getting your professional marks and for really getting high marks for your report is your conclusion. So you have the introduction, you have your whatever you want to raise in the middle, and then you have your conclusion. The share for share exchange gives the highest return for Kawa shareholders and also makes a good return for Lala shareholders. So that's very clear when we looked at our numbers. Right? But the concern that Lala is unlisted might make the cash payment method a preferred one for Kawa. The current offer is less than the value generated from the demerger and unlikely to be accepted. Therefore, a cash offer to match the benefit from the demerger would need to be made. The initial cash offer and a higher revised cash offer would have a significant impact on Lala's capital structure in terms of increased debt. Therefore, it is recommended at the end of these sections, you must have that it is recommended. It's vital. It is recommended that Lala should consider equity finance through a partial listing. This would also enable Kawa shareholders to trade their shares and thereby make the deal look better for them. Even if you don't do the conclusion part like they did there, and you don't need to that extent, even if you don't do a rehash, the main part of your conclusion, and every single question you answer in FRM, my opinion is, it is recommended. Whatever version of that has to be in every answer you give. That's where the marks are coming. That's where the professional marks are coming. It is recommended. It is recommended they should do this and why. In this conclusion, they said, what are the issues? And then they said how this will solve those issues. But you can also say, it is recommended that Lala should consider equity finance through a partial listing because this would enable Kawa, because Kawa shareholders are worried, and this will enable them to trade their shares and thereby make the deal look better for them. I would actually just include the last 2 or 3 lines of that conclusion and wouldn't worry about anything else. It's a rehash of what's there before. Yes, again, it's a difference between getting 11 marks and getting 9 marks, but it's eating into a lot of your time. And then the simple thing of report compiled by, you put your own name in if there's not a name, or compiled by John Smith or whatever, anything you want, and put a date in, put your exam date in. Again, you see that at the bottom of the solution, credit will be given for alternative and valid discursive comments. So just because they're not there, I said earlier, if you make a case and you can justify your case, you will get marks for that. Just because they're not in this conclusion doesn't mean you're wrong. It's just your interpretation of the numbers. Okay. Now, just don't forget that at the end of this, when you're doing this, you want to delete anything that's related to what you copied in. And you just, for example, we've just done the report here, and you just want to leave the report in there, and you might say, you might put C at the top, just so the examiner knows what you're actually doing, and then you'll have part A and part B, so they'll know what you're talking about. But again, and you get rid of anything else that's down here that's not related to the question. So you should only leave what your solution is, okay? And then take out everything else. But it's very useful to have that as you go. Okay, you don't have to do anything with your calculations. You don't write any conclusions, nothing like that. You've done all your calculations. You've put your numbers into your report. Then everything works from there. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? If I had a poll up, and maybe let's do a kind of a quick poll, and I'd like to ask you guys, but it's not going to be in a poll, so maybe just put in the chat. Do you feel like you could do a question like this in an hour and a half? Or do you feel that you know how to come up with a plan now? Do you have any questions about a plan? It's not about the I think what you have to realize is not about the content. So do you feel like now, after today, that you understand that there's an importance of putting a plan together and having a way of attacking a question and splitting it by time, and how to manage your time better. That should be your number one goal of today. And I hope you do feel that. I do hope that has got across, because if you can manage the time, if you can create a structure for yourself, if you can understand that you can, the effort required for the marks that you're getting, and appreciate that, that's really what you should be targeting from today. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to show you very quickly questions 2 and 3. I'm not going to go through the solutions with you. Again, today isn't about going through all the solutions. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, remind you of those planning techniques for question 2 and 3, and what you would do, what I would suggest that you do on the day of the exam. Okay. And if you have any questions, do let me know as we go. So that's question 1. Roughly 90 to 97 minutes. And I know this sounds very exact, but you should be very exact. You should be very disciplined and diligent about the time. So 90 to 97 minutes after you started your exam, you should be finished question 1. There's also a lot of questions about which question do students do first. And it depends on you, I guess. Realistically, there's no answer. You can do them in any order you want. I think question 1 is quite a mental challenge. And I do think you are better off attacking question 1 in as fresh as you can. So if you're doing 4 questions on your paper and they're all worth 25% each, I would say pick your favorite topic and do them in any order you want. But you can't do parts of question 1 and then come back to it. It's also interlinked. So for AFM and for all strategic professional papers that have that larger question 1, I would generally recommend that you do question 1 first, because it's a lot of effort that you put into question 1. And it's a real case of not getting through it. But I think if you did question 2 and 3 first, and then you're attacking question 1 when your reserves are low, I think it would be a harder thing to do. Whereas doing question 2 and 3 after question 1, there's a mental thing about them only being kind of 25 marks each. So I would recommend doing AFM question 1 first. I think if you had a preference between question 2 and 3 in the exam, I don't think it matters what order you do them in. I think you should do them in whatever order you're comfortable with. You might prefer one of the questions over the other by far. Absolutely no issue with you doing that. But I would strongly recommend you do question 1. And I strongly recommend that 97 minutes or so after the exam starts, you are done with question 1. You move on. See this button down here? You press next. You go to section B and you start again. And it's a fresh page. You leave it all behind you. Again, you could fly through question 2 and 3. You could find them really straightforward and really easy, really simple to follow. And you could have 10 minutes at the very end to go back and fill in those gaps you'd like to add or that additional information. But again, be aware that adding too much information into question 1 will affect your professional marks. So usually what you can do in that time is all you really can do and all you should be worried about doing. Another question I get asked a lot about using this system. So let's talk about more exam technique about using the system. And it's people are worried about being slow readers or slow typers. Some people have better typing speed. I think I'm not particularly fast. And then some people have better reading speeds and some people read much slower. And that's something that individually you have to cater for in your exam practice, not in your exam. Your exam isn't the day to realize that you read a bit slower than other people or you type it a bit faster or whatever. You should know this already. So when I say that for question 1, the 15 minutes at the beginning of the exam, you have half that time to read for question 1. You might need more time, but you might be a faster typist. So that's why it's really important that you practice these questions in a time setting. And if you find you're constantly running out of time, you have to figure something has to give. So if you like to take your time with reading, and therefore you like to take your time with writing, you have to accept you're going to write less, and you have to be much more accurate with what you write. So if you're running out of time because you're writing a lot, you need to learn how to answer questions by writing less. And if you're a really fast typist and a really good reader, well then save that time. Don't write more because you have time left over. Use that time to check your calculations or to reread or correct your spelling, because if you have the time, why not make it look as good as possible? So that's why the practice is so important. That's why that you should not be practicing another question between now and your exam without a clock, a stopwatch, an alarm, whatever it is. It's really, really important. This is going to make the difference. I promise you, it will be tough. You will feel like you're constantly putting yourself under pressure, but that will ease over time. And the second one will be easier than the first one. And the fifth one will be much easier than the first one. By the time you get to that exam, it'll be so second nature that you will remove, what we're trying to do is remove time as a consideration, as a technique by which to create pressure on you in the exam. Because if you think of any exam, there's new content, there's questions you haven't seen before, there's topics together you mightn't have come across before. You already have to worry about enough. You already have to figure out enough without trying to figure out, oh, how am I going to manage this with time? So take time out of it. Make time an automatic reaction. That's what's key. And some of you might be skeptical, and I'm sure you are. And I can't stop you being skeptical, but I can promise you it works. And you are, especially for those of you who have taken this exam before and not passed, like I would suggest, and if we look at back earlier with time management in the polls that we took, there's a link between the time management being the biggest issue and the fact that a number of people have done exams, and that likely time management has been that issue. You are in control. It is not the examiner's fault. It's not because it's a hard paper. It's not because they're trying to fail people on purpose. None of that. You are in control of your time. Okay, I promise you, the ACCA examining team would love the pass rates to be 50, 60%. They would be more than happy with that. They're not trying to keep them low. They're not trying to make them look hard. They're not trying to fail. Everybody marking an exam wants to pass as many people as they can, but they're only going to pass it if you deserve it. So you need to take time out of it. So this is a question I haven't done any preparation on, and I'm going to show you again what I would do. So you've been told that the following exhibits are available on the left-hand side of the screen, providing information. So we have our spreadsheet and we have our word processor. And I would automatically just go into organization mode, where I take my word processor, I stick it over there, I take my spreadsheet, put it up here somewhere, make it a certain size, doesn't really matter how much. I make sure that I have access to my exhibits and my requirements. I go into my requirements and I go, okay, 25 marks split into 2 questions. Great, that's a great start. So those 25 marks split into 2 questions. What do I do with those 25 marks split into 2 questions? So part A and part B. I'm not going to read them yet. I'm going to copy this in. I'm going to close down my requirements. And paste them in here. Give them a bit of space so I can see them. Okay. Now, what am I being asked to do for 14 marks? Calculate the adjusted present value of the investment, and one of the most important words in ACCA, and. So even though part A is worth 14 marks, there's actually 2 tasks in part A. Calculate the adjusted present value of the investment, and recommend whether the project should be accepted or not. Okay, that's worth 14 marks. Part 2, or Part B, discuss the factors the capital providers, excluding the bank. Now, a comment in the examining team for this was that most people talked about the bank because they didn't read the question carefully enough. They saw capital providers, they saw bank, and they wrote everything they knew about banks providing capital. It's excluding the bank will consider before deciding whether or not to approve the funding decision for Robson's investment into a new manufacturing plant. Okay, worth 11 marks. So I know I have a calculation and I know I have a discussion part. I know my 25-mark question, I have 45 minutes plus a few minutes of my reading time. But I usually in my head, I think, okay, 45 minutes and a minute or two to finish off. So I roughly have 25 minutes for part A and 20 minutes for part B. What do I need to know part of my reading? Well, I have 2 exhibits. The first exhibit is Robson as a food manufacturer and well-known brands, and the founding directors retain a significant minority shareholding. You're given a lot of background. And then you see here, I have to calculate an adjusted present value calculation. Look at all this information here. Cash flows, the investment costs, information on interest and disposal, additional information on equity ratios. Great. Your corporation tax rate. Brilliant. Okay. Exhibit number 1 is for part A. Great. I now know I will put that up here. I'll make that a little bit better sized. I'm going to stick that over there. And I know when it comes to me doing part A, I'm going to put that up on screen for my calculation. Further information. What could be in my further information? Well, let's have a look. So the board discussed the financing of the project. Oh, that's what they asked in part B. Robson's corporate bankers have already approved the funding decision for the 50 million bank loan, but the finance director is concerned about the following capital providers: external shareholders, founding directors, and a subsidized loan provider. So now you're saying, okay, discuss the factors that capital providers excluding the bank. Well, you've been given 4 capital providers in this one. The first one is the bank, which you exclude. So now you know you're going to discuss the factors that the capital providers will consider for external shareholders, for founding directors, and for a subsidized loan provider. And you're given some narrative in here to help you see what they find important. So external shareholders, a group of shareholders formed an action to make a drastic change and they want to replace the CEO. So these are the factors that they're going to consider. So now this question, when you just spend a little bit of time doing it, what we know is this part, this number, question 2, or exhibit 2, sorry, is going to be for part B, and exhibit 1 is going to be for part A. Great. What do we already also know? We know that part A is going to be a calculation, part B is going to be a discussion. So what I would have is I would have my spreadsheet and I would have my exhibit 1 open together when I'm doing my calculation. And I would have my further information and my word processor open when I'm doing part 2. Because you're doing it's calculate. Now, recommend whether the project should be accepted or not. Well, it's adjusted present value. So if it's positive, it's a yes. If it's negative, it's a no. That's pretty straightforward. So you can write that in the Excel sheet, or you can say the project was positive or the project was negative. So I say yes or no. So realistically, this is really straightforward. This is a very nice question because you don't have to, again, the benefit of just spending a couple of minutes, you don't have to wonder who the capital providers are. Because when you read that, they go, capital providers, who are the capital providers? And then you open up exhibit 2 and they say, oh, here are the 3 capital providers. The examining team have told you who they want you to talk about. Okay. If you go down to, again, pop down to question 2, marking scheme, you will see that in part A, there's 14 marks going, and there's 14 marks right through it. So the tax shield and subsidized loans, because it's adjusted present value. And again, you can have a look at that calculation, and it's a calculation. If adjusted present value calculation came up like this, you should be really happy. You should be prepared for a calculation like this. Certainly the two calculations that are in this paper, previous questions on forwards and futures and how they're used to calculate funding, I think they're the three that you should be very familiar with in preparation for this exam. But look at part B. 11 marks going for part B. In total, there are 30 marks available. 4 to 5, 3 to 4, 3 to 4. So again, what do you need? I need 4 points on one. So if you said to yourself, okay, there's 11 marks. I'm going to make 4 points for each one. I'm going to make 4 points about the shareholders. And again, they give you some guidance there, as well as giving you the longer answer. I'm going to make 4 about the directors. And I'm going to make 4 about the subsidized loan providers. So that's all that you need. And I don't mean that's all that you need to do. If you break it down, the biggest part of technique and time management and all of that is breaking down a question to its simplest form. Breaking it right down and digging as deep as you possibly can. So not only now have we been able to break this question down into 2 parts, not only do we know one part is all calculation and one part is all discussion, but we also know that within the discussion, we've been able to break that down into 3 further parts. So now what you're doing is you're doing one calculation and you're doing 3 4-mark answers. And you have headings already. What can I think about to write about external shareholders? What can I think about to write about founding directors? What can I think about to write about the subsidized loan providers? And I'll probably get hints from the appendix or from the exhibit. And then you're right. So if you look here, I would say 3 to 4 marks, 4 to 5 marks when you're looking at the marking scheme. I would say you're probably looking at 3 good points for each one. If you made a point on external shareholders and a line to explain it, and you did 3 of them for each of those 3. So if you kind of had 9 well-discussed points, you'll get the majority of those marks. Again, you'll get 8 or 9 out of 11, which is more than you'd ever need, but you'll do that within the time. So again, get 8 out of 11 well within time, then getting 11 out of 11, and you've used too much time. Okay, so again, break it down, but this can only happen with practice. But this is what makes a difference, and especially for those of you who are doing AFM for the first time, but have done an ACCA exam before, hopefully this helps. For those of you who are doing AFM for the first time, and because of exemptions, this could be your first ACCA exam, this is really important stuff. And for those of you who have done AFM before and not been able to pass it, I'm hoping that you see a lot of things in here that you didn't do the last time. And again, it's easy to write this list. I could write 5 points to do or 3 points to do on the day of the exam. And there's lots of those videos and you'll find them. And I'm sure you've been searching the internet for tips on how to pass AFM. This is the best tip. This nearly 4 hours that we spent together, this is your tip. It's not about guessing what topic will come up. It's not about trying to say, what will the examiner ask this time? It's not about focusing on pass rates. It's not about people talking about how hard AFM is. This is it. Giving a structure and a plan around how you approach your exam, how you build up your exam from the bottom, how you build up 1 mark after another. Think of it like you're building a wall. 1 row of bricks, another row of bricks, another row of bricks, up to that 50% level. Get it up to 52% just to make sure. But that's all. That's what you're trying to do. You're not trying to over answer. You're not trying to get 90 and 100% all of the time. Go for 70. Give yourself some room. But doing it in the time, doing quality answers in the time is more important than writing lots and running out of time. I promise you that. And I think a lot of you who have done this exam before will probably hopefully admit to that and acknowledge that. But that can't be, you can't walk away from this and say, you know what, I learned something today from Alan. I learned about planning my questions. That's what I'm going to do in my exam. But if you don't do that between now, you have 3 weeks and 5 days, if my calculations are right, or 3 weeks and 6 days, between now and your AFM exam. And if you just kind of say, that's what I'm going to do the day of my exam, and practice questions in your own manner or in the same manner as you have been now, it won't help you. In fact, it'll be more confusing because you'll have practiced in one way and then you'll try and change the way. But your best way of success, and it is a hard road, it is a difficult road. I am not denying that for 1 second. It is a difficult thing to do. It's every day put yourself under that time pressure, but it will get easier. I promise you. Any athletes out there who run or cycle, and the first time you run is really hard, the second time you run is still really hard, the third time not quite as hard, and after a few weeks you're running and you're wondering, oh, how did I ever find that hard at all? It's still difficult, but it's not hard because you've got better, because you've practiced at it, because you've improved at it. And I've said this so many times today, you can complicate AFM. You can put a lot of roadblocks in your way to pass your AFM exam. Easily put a lot of roadblocks in your way. But actually, if you master this, everything else will fall into place. So I'm going to leave you with that. I'm not, otherwise I'll just spend 10 more minutes telling you the same thing, because it does, as you can tell, I'm quite passionate about this because I've seen a lot of students be really successful because they have done things in the right way. So I appreciate your time today. I do hope this helped a little bit. Use this video. I know the video is being recorded, so I presume you have access to it afterwards. Use it as a resource, find those places. But remember what today wasn't. Today wasn't to show you how to calculate the percentage increase in share value because of a takeover. We could have done any question. We could have picked a question from 10 years ago and it still would have been relevant to what today's class was about. Today's class is about getting you ready to face anything that comes up in the exam. And it gives you a roadmap, and it gives you a set of tools, and it gives you a structure to take on anything that can come up in the exam. But it's what you do from when this ends until the first week, that end of week in December. It's what you do between now and then that will make all the difference. And if you follow those simple exam techniques, everything else will come from that. You will learn more. You will learn more about the topics. You'll pick up stuff from looking at the solutions, all of that, looking at the marking schemes, comparing what you wrote to comparing what was in the solution. Did you really need all of that? But again, a stopwatch, a clock, your phone, whatever it might be, that's what's gonna, and I know it sounds simple, but that will make the difference. That will change, dramatically change how you will do an ACCA, any ACCA exam. We're talking about AFM today, but any ACCA exam, it will dramatically change. And I think, and I'm nearly sure, improve your performance in your next exam and subsequent exams if you got any more after this one. So if there's no questions, I'm going to leave it there for today. As I said, I hope that was useful. I really wish you all the best in your studies. Whatever you decide to do, whatever approach you have, I realize that ACCA are hard. They are difficult exams, but they are worthwhile. It is a good career. It will provide you hopefully a successful long career. But the work starts now. This is where you put the work in to get that benefit of that long career. So I wish you all the best in your exams. I hope you enjoy the rest of your nearly evening now. My morning has just started, but your evening now. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Don't rush off and start practicing questions. Think about what you heard today. Pick out the parts that you think are relevant to you, that you think will help you. And from tomorrow, have a new approach, change your approach, update your approach, improve your approach. Do something that, don't waste today. Pick one or two or whatever things that you think are relevant to you, and make those changes now. Don't wait till the day before the exam or the week before the exam. Make those changes that you pick now, because they will be invaluable, and it'll be the difference between you passing and not passing your exam. So all the best in your exams, and I will hopefully not talk to you soon at another AFM webinar, because you'll all pass in December. So all the best.